Hello everyone and welcome back to Mr. Night Fear. I know many of you listen to these stories to help you fall asleep. So before you get settled in, I'd love for you to leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from. And if you're enjoying the episodes, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Now, let's get comfortable, relax, and begin. It was one summer night when I was 12 years old in a small town called Pine Hollow. For some reason, I woke up around 4 a.m. with this strange feeling that I wasn't alone. It was like something was in the room with me, but I couldn't quite figure out what. I tried to ignore it, and, in an attempt to calm myself, I reached over to my bedside table and turned on the radio. I figured some music would help me relax, maybe even get me to drift back to sleep. But I couldn't have been more wrong. Since it was summer, I had the windows open with just the screens up to keep the night air fresh, and like usual, my bedroom door was shut tight. Lying there with the sheet pulled over my head, I tried desperately to focus on the soft music playing, but that uneasy feeling, it wouldn't leave. I felt paralyzed, trapped in my own bed, with no real reason for the fear creeping up my spine. Then, out of nowhere, I heard this growl from the foot of my bed. It didn't sound like a person or even an animal. It was deep, low, and filled with a kind of raw anger that made my blood run cold. I couldn't move, couldn't scream. The growling lasted only about 8 seconds, but to me, it felt like an eternity. As soon as it stopped, I bolted out of bed, heart racing, and ran straight into my mom's room. I told her what happened, and she immediately came to check on me. She searched my room thoroughly, but found nothing. The screen windows were intact, no signs of a break-in or any animal intrusion. And our dog, who always slept in the living room, hadn't made a peep. If anything had come near the house, he would have gone crazy. That night, I ended up sleeping in my mom's bed, clinging to her like a little kid. I didn't sleep at all. My mom kept telling me it must have been a bad dream, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. For years, I convinced myself she was right, until something happened years later that made even her doubt it. 4 years later, in late November, my mom and my 12-year-old brother were lying in her bed one evening. My dad was at work, and my brother, who was always uneasy in the house, often slept with my mom when he got scared. They were chatting, laughing, when suddenly, they heard a growling noise. At first, my mom didn't think much of it, but when it grew louder, she paused, listening closely. Thinking I was playing a prank on them, my mom laughed and called out, "Jen, knock it off." But I wasn't there. I was asleep in my room, completely unaware of what was happening. When the noise didn't stop, my mom flipped on the light and scanned the room. There was no one there. The growling had stopped, just like that, leaving an unsettling silence in its wake. That wasn't the only strange occurrence in our house. One afternoon, my mom was sitting on the couch in the living room, trying to relax, when she suddenly had the feeling she was being watched. She glanced up at the front door and froze. In the bottom window pane, she saw the face of a man, older with a long beard, staring back at her. Just as quickly as it appeared, he vanished. Shaken, she ran outside, but there was no sign of anyone. It was broad daylight. On another occasion, my mom woke up early in the morning to the sound of dresser drawers opening and closet doors slamming shut in my room. She thought I was up early, packing for a trip to visit my boyfriend in a few days. But when she came to check, I was still fast asleep, completely oblivious. Still, she swears the noises lasted at least 10 minutes. And then there were the silver lights. Both my mom and I saw them at different times while standing in the bathroom. These small glowing lights would dart past the corner of our eyes, always heading toward my brother's room. We only saw them a few times, but each occurrence was within the same 2 days. I'm not sure what was going on in that house, but it was never truly peaceful. My dad had built it himself about 20 years ago, so it wasn't like we had moved into an old, rundown property. But as time went on, we started to learn a few things about the land. It turned out the area had a history. Years ago, it had been part of an old logging settlement, but before that, it had been used by Native American tribes who would camp there in the summers. Perhaps that old energy was still lingering. Maybe that was the source of all the strange things happening. Who could say for sure? Even now, when I think about it, I still can't explain the strange happenings in that house. But something tells me it wasn't just our imagination playing tricks on us. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. I can still remember the sound of the door slamming shut in the hallway, the noise echoing through the house, each time followed by the same reassuring words from my parents. It's just the wind. Over time, that strange sound became just another part of our home, something we learned to ignore, to live with. As a child, I was told there was no such thing as ghosts or things that go bump in the night. But now, when my children ask me the same questions I once asked, I can't give them the same answer. You see, I grew up in a house that was haunted. I remember the days spent sitting on the front porch, waiting for my parents to return from work, too afraid to go inside alone. Our house had started out small, but in 1970, my dad decided to add onto it. He expanded the house, adding an upstairs with 2 bedrooms and a large living room. I was 12 at the time, and my brother Mike was 8. The new part of the house was connected to the old by a long, narrow hallway. The first strange occurrence I can remember happened the very first night I spent in my new bedroom. The room wasn't fully set up yet. The closet was empty except for a few metal hangers. The closet doors were the sliding kind, running on tracks, so one door would overlap the other when opened. That night, I lay in bed, not quite asleep, taking in the smell of fresh paint and new wood floors. Suddenly, I heard a soft clink from the closet, like metal hangers gently tapping against one another. I froze. The closet doors were shut, and even if they had been open, there was no draft to explain the sound. My room had only one window, high near the ceiling, and you needed a chair to see out of it. Plus, it was always warm in there. There was no breeze. Terrified, I finally worked up the courage to run down to my parents' room and sleep at the foot of their bed. I didn't dare wake them. I just needed to be near them. Things only escalated after that. My parents moved back into their downstairs bedroom, and my 2 younger brothers took over the room next to mine. One hot summer night, with no air conditioning upstairs, my brothers decided to sleep on the floor of the upstairs living room. I opted to sleep in their room, hoping for even the slightest breeze through its 2 open windows. As I lay there, trying to fall asleep, I heard a low, raspy breathing sound coming from the living room. Thinking my brothers were trying to scare me, I called out, "Okay, you're not scaring me. Go to sleep." But Mike called back, "Debbie, that's not me." Moments later, he ran into the room and jumped into bed with me. Our other brother, Bobby, was still asleep out in the living room. Mike and I lay still, heads buried under the covers. After a few minutes, we cautiously pulled the blanket down and listened. For a moment, everything was silent. Then the breathing started again. But this time, it wasn't coming from the living room. It was coming from the bedroom with us. It sounded like someone gasping for air, heavy and labored. Panicked, we both suggested running downstairs, and we bolted, leaving Bobby behind. We screamed all the way through the hallway, waking up our parents. Dad, thinking someone had broken in, searched the house. He found nothing. What he didn't realize was that something had entered, but it wasn't human. It took a long time before we dared to sleep upstairs again. For weeks, we camped out on the living room floor downstairs. When we finally did return to our rooms, we had to choose: sleep with the hallway door closed and the light on, or leave the door open and the light off, trying not to disturb our parents. It wasn't an easy decision. As the months passed, strange occurrences continued. One Christmas, while we were all sitting in the living room watching TV, we heard the sound of glass breaking from the hallway. We checked, but there was nothing broken in the hall. Still, when we walked to the kitchen, we found a broken Christmas ornament, one that wasn't even in the hallway. My youngest brother, Tony, seemed to witness the most strange happenings. He saw shadowy figures and mist-like shapes coming from the kitchen. He heard knocks at the door late at night, but when he opened it, no one was there. Once, while home alone in the basement, he heard coins being dropped on the floor above him. One night, while talking to his girlfriend Lori on the phone, Tony cut his finger while sharpening a knife. He told Lori to hold on while he went downstairs to get something to stop the bleeding. When he returned, Lori asked, "Who else is there with you?" Confused, Tony replied, "No one." Lori insisted she had heard a man's voice on the phone say, "Don't worry, he's alive," in a sarcastic tone. Several of us in the family have heard our names being called in the house. My aunt, who had lived with us for a time, mentioned hearing her name called and footsteps in the upstairs living room. A few months ago, my sister Sharon and I were sitting in the kitchen having coffee with our mom when we both heard someone call Sharon's name, clear as day. Thinking it was our dad, Sharon walked into the living room where he was watching TV, but he hadn't called her. Confused, she returned to the kitchen and asked, "Did you hear someone call me?" I nodded. My mom hadn't heard a thing. We couldn't even agree if the voice was male or female. Sharon has always had strange experiences. One time, while sitting at the table eating soup, something tried to pull a cracker out of her hand. She also saw a shadow move behind her, its outline appearing on the wall. Another time, when Sharon was in high school, she and her friend Lori came home one evening to an empty house. My brother's car was parked outside, so they assumed he was home. Lori went upstairs to his room and opened the door. She heard someone rolling over in bed. Thinking it was my brother, she sat down carefully, trying not to wake him by turning on the light. But when she sat down, she realized the bed was empty. Terrified, she ran downstairs, pale and shaking. Sharon, alarmed, knew something was wrong. As they opened the front door to leave, the lights in the house went out. It all started with a sense of unease that grew stronger over time. The first night it really hit us was when we were rushing to the car after hearing a strange noise inside the house. The keys were still lying on the coffee table. After a quick glance at each other, we decided to go back for them. When we opened the door, the house was dark as night, no lights, just the distant hum of the fridge. No flashlight in hand, we stumbled our way toward the coffee table. Halfway there, the lights flickered back on, bright and sudden, as if nothing had ever been wrong. We grabbed the keys and bolted, spending the rest of the night at a nearby diner. We couldn't shake the feeling that something was waiting for us to return. Then there was the time Sharon stayed behind to do laundry while everyone else was out. She stood at the bottom of the stairs as her little boy went up to grab a toy. Just as he reached the bedroom, there was a loud crack, a noise like wood breaking. Stunned, he froze, his eyes darting to the room, then back to Sharon. Without a word, he ran down to her, his face pale with fear. He was too young to explain what he saw, but whatever it was, it left him too terrified to go near the stairs for weeks. Even the family dog, Morgan, seemed to sense it. One bitter cold winter night, my mom decided to sleep on the couch while Morgan stayed inside for warmth. As they watched TV together, Morgan suddenly stopped, his body rigid, staring into the kitchen with a growl that rumbled low in his chest. Mom, unsettled, got up and walked him into the kitchen to show him there was nothing there, or at least, she hoped there was nothing. But Morgan stayed alert all night, never relaxing, always watching the kitchen door with his ears perked up, his growls coming in short bursts. Mom, always the skeptic, tried to brush these incidents off, but some of them were too strange to ignore. One afternoon, while washing dishes, both she and my sister felt the distinct sensation that someone was standing directly behind them. A cold draft swirled in the kitchen, even though all the windows were shut tight. Another time, while in the basement, Mom witnessed a large cardboard box shift as if it was about to topple. There wasn't a breeze, no reason for it to move. The window was closed, and the air was still. Alarmed, she called my brother Tony. As soon as he came to the stairs, the box froze, as though it had never moved. But the strangest experiences seemed to revolve around my brother Ronnie. For years, he would misplace his keys only to find them later in odd places, sometimes back in the same drawer he had already searched, or hidden in spots he had checked a dozen times. We eventually realized it wasn't just forgetfulness. It was something else, something we couldn't explain. Ronnie even said he could feel when the spirit was near. He'd get a chill or something in the air would shift, signaling that something was about to happen. On one occasion, While at a friend's house for the night, he claimed it followed him there. One of the most chilling incidents happened when Ronnie invited some friends from church over for a sleepover. They snuck downstairs for a midnight snack. As they flipped the light on in the kitchen, every pot and pan hanging from the wall crashed to the floor at once. It wasn't just one, every single one. They bolted back upstairs in a panic, hearts racing, too terrified to even speak. I've had my own share of unsettling moments. One evening, I was sitting in the living room on the phone when a small figurine, a ceramic boxer, flew off the mantel and hit the floor. It hadn't been near the edge of the shelf, and there was no way it could have just fallen. It was one of those things that stayed with me for days. Even outside the house, the strange occurrences continued. Ronnie's wife, Sherry, once saw her late father standing by the road while they were driving. He was dressed in his old jeans and a white t-shirt, just standing there as if waiting for them. Another time, while Ronnie was home alone, he was bending over the tub, washing his hair, when he felt a sharp shove on his back. Thinking it was his wife playing a prank, he turned only to find no one there. Seconds later, Sherry walked in, having just arrived. The timing was too strange to ignore. Years later, my brother Tony moved into an old house with some friends. From the start, they heard footsteps in the halls, felt thumps coming from the walls, and doors rattled as though someone was trying to break in. One night, Tony was alone in his room when the doorknob to the porch began shaking violently. He grabbed his shotgun and checked outside, but no one was there. As soon as he lay back down, the rattling began again. This time, he stayed in bed, gripping the shotgun, too afraid to close his eyes. Looking back, I still don't know what to believe. My dad built that house with his own hands, and we knew the land well. But the land had its own stories that we couldn't shake. Mom once told us how she had burned an Ouija board she used years before, swearing she'd never bring one into the house again. Whether that had something to do with it, we'll never know. Now the house is quieter. The strange events have lessened since we all moved out, but the memories remain. Whatever it was, whoever it was, it changed us. It turned a once simple family, church-going and grounded, into a family with more questions than answers. It was one of those quiet nights, the kind where everything outside feels frozen in time, and the only sound is the soft, rhythmic tapping of rain against the window. I had just wrapped up my shift at the diner, feeling the familiar exhaustion that usually comes with a long day. My small apartment in Silver Springs, the one I'd called home for the past few years, felt strangely still tonight. Too still. I didn't think much of it, though. After all, it was just another night in this sleepy town. The rain was gentle, and the streets outside were quiet, wrapped in the sort of peaceful, dark blanket that only a late autumn evening could provide. I climbed into bed, the sound of raindrops soon becoming the perfect lullaby. But as I lay there, something felt off. There was an unsettling stillness in the air, a heaviness that didn't belong. I thought maybe it was just my tired mind playing tricks on me. But then, the longer I lay there, the more I began to sense that something was wrong. I was drifting off when I suddenly heard a soft, almost imperceptible sound. At first, I thought it was the wind, maybe a branch scraping against the side of the building. But then, I heard it again, a faint creaking noise, almost like someone shifting their weight. It came from the far corner of the room. My heart raced. Was there someone else here? I quickly dismissed the thought. It's just the old building, I reassured myself. The wood creaks, the pipes settle. It happens all the time. But the unease lingered, gnawing at the back of my mind. I pulled the blankets tighter around me, my eyes scanning the darkness of the room, now more aware of every sound. The rain outside continued its gentle rhythm, but I couldn't focus on it anymore. My mind kept drifting back to the noise, the feeling of eyes on me. Then I heard it again, a whisper, so faint it was almost like breathing. It was so close that it sent a chill down my spine. I froze. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and the room suddenly felt colder. It wasn't just the weather. There was something here with me. I tried to convince myself it was nothing. A draft, the wind playing tricks, but deep down, I knew better. The feeling of being watched was overwhelming, and I couldn't shake the thought that maybe it wasn't just the house settling. Maybe something, or someone, was lingering in the shadows. Had anyone else felt it? I wondered if my roommate, Mike, or one of my friends had experienced anything strange here before. This apartment had a history, nothing concrete, just whispers from people who had lived here before me, but enough to make me wonder. I didn't hear the whisper again, but the room felt off. The rain, which had once felt comforting, now seemed distant, almost alien, like it didn't belong. The walls, creaking and shifting with the night, felt more like an old graveyard than a place to rest. I slowly sat up in bed, my body tense, uncertain whether I should get up and check, or if I was just imagining things. But the room remained quiet, too quiet. I've always believed that dogs can do more than just listen. They can understand, and for as long as I can remember, Max and Bella, my two dachshunds, have been by my side. I grew up with them, from elementary school all the way through high school. We lived in a cozy house in a small town, a place where neighbors still waved as they passed, and the sound of crickets filled the air at night. But in 1999, Bella passed away. It hit our family hard. She'd been battling back issues that only worsened after a fall. We didn't want her to suffer anymore, so we made the heartbreaking decision to let her go. Then, in 2000, Max's health started to decline. The same back problems that had taken Bella away seemed to be affecting him too. One day, he couldn't even stand up. Max was more than a pet. It was my best friend. Through the ups and downs of growing up, through all the quiet moments and all the noisy ones, he was always there. I'd tell him everything, from the smallest of frustrations to my deepest secrets. Dogs don't speak, but somehow they understand, and that made all the difference. When he passed, it left a hole in my heart that nothing seemed to fill. For weeks, I avoided Daisy, our new dog. She came into our lives after Bella's passing, but I wasn't ready to open my heart to another dog just yet. My mom and brother spent time with her, getting her used to the house, while I tried to cope with the grief. Then one night, something strange happened. I woke up in the middle of the night thirsty. As I made my way to the kitchen, I thought I saw a shadow moving in the hallway. I stopped. The hallway was dark, but I could have sworn I saw a dog walking past my brother's door and toward mine. It wasn't Daisy. I knew that. The door to my parents' room was still closed. I stood there for a moment, wondering if I was imagining it. Maybe I was half asleep, but when I went back to my room, something else caught my attention. I thought I saw Max, lying on my bed, staring at me. I froze. Was I dreaming? Was it just my mind playing tricks on me? I couldn't tell. It felt so real, though. I had to make a note of it in my journal, the one where I jot down anything unusual that happens around the house. The next day, something even stranger happened. I was sitting alone in my room, Daisy curled up on my lap without her collar, when I heard it, the familiar sound of a collar jingling. It came from the stairs. I wasn't imagining it. It sounded exactly like Max or Bella's collar. My heart skipped a beat. I didn't know what to think. Could it be them? Or was I just longing for their presence so badly that I was hearing things? Years passed, and Daisy settled into our lives. But then one day, an unexpected call came. A friend of mine from the animal shelter told us about a dachshund that needed a home. We went to meet him, and when I saw him for the first time, I froze. His face, his eyes, they looked so much like Max's. The same little expressions, the same warm, familiar gaze. Even now, Rufus, our new puppy, reminds me of Max so much. I often find myself wondering, could Rufus somehow be Max, returning to let me know he's okay? Maybe it's just my imagination, but sometimes when I look into his eyes, I can almost hear Max's bark in my mind. Now, 4 years later, Rufus is part of our family. But still, every now and then, I'll hear something that makes my heart race, a soft jingling of a collar, a rustle in the hallway when no one else is there. Even when both Daisy and Rufus are asleep. This happened about 3 years ago, and even though it's been some time, The feeling still lingers with me like it was just yesterday. The place was an old mansion-turned-hotel in the remote hills of Pennsylvania. I can't quite remember the exact name of the place. I'm terrible with names, but it was a few hours outside of Philadelphia, deep in the quiet woods. It was one of the last stops on our 2-week road trip, and my family and I stayed there for the night. We were part of a vacation group traveling by bus. That evening, the group had the option to either gather at the pub downstairs or spend the evening on our own. Since there was a wedding happening downstairs, I decided to take some quiet time in my room while my parents went to join the others. After a long day of sightseeing, I was looking forward to unwinding in peace. I took a long, hot shower, savoring the silence, but there was an odd feeling that I couldn't shake. The bathroom door was shut, and the room felt empty, but I had this unnerving sense that someone was standing just outside. I made sure to lock the main door, but still, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. At first, I chopped it up to my imagination, but the feeling stuck with me. When I stepped out of the bathroom, the room was exactly as I'd left it. Everything seemed normal, yet that strange sensation lingered, like I wasn't really alone. I spent the rest of the evening reading and writing in my journal, trying to dismiss the feeling, but the unease didn't fade. It felt like someone, or something, was still there with me, watching me. I couldn't explain it, but I could feel it. Later, when my parents returned from the pub, we all went to bed. My mom and dad shared one bed, while I slept in another, in the large, quiet room in the old mansion. Now, I'm a big believer in the paranormal, and so is my mom. But my dad, he doesn't buy into any of it. He always says it's just our imagination. But that night, something about the atmosphere felt different. In the middle of the night, I woke up needing to adjust my hearing aids. At first, I thought it was just the silence playing tricks on me, but then I noticed something strange. There was a slow, steady breathing sound coming from the middle of the room. It wasn't my parents breathing. No, this was something else. It was almost as if something was standing between them, watching over us. I lay there in the dark, frozen, unsure of what I was hearing. I tried to convince myself that it was just my imagination, but I couldn't shake the feeling. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up again, and that sense of being watched was overwhelming. The next morning, as we walked to the tour bus, my mom leaned in and quietly asked me, "Did you hear that extra breathing last night?" My heart skipped a beat, and I nodded. We both agreed that it didn't sound like the usual snoring. I told her that before they returned to the room, I had felt like someone was already there with me, but I kept quiet, afraid of sounding silly. The second night at the mansion, I heard it again. The same slow, steady breathing, as if something was standing between the beds, watching over us. It was eerie, but I managed to fall asleep, though the discomfort stayed with me all night. The tour we were on was amazing. Historic sites, graveyards, old churches, and local bars. But it was the graveyards that intrigued me the most. There was something about them, an eerie stillness mixed with an undeniable weight of history. As I wandered through them, taking in the old headstones and weathered crypts, I couldn't help but wonder if the strange presence I'd felt in the mansion was connected to one of these spirits. Was there something, someone, still lingering, unable to move on? Even now, I often think back on that trip. I wish I could remember the names of all the places we visited and the new people I met along the way. Looking at old photos from that trip brings it all back. The beautiful countryside, the quiet, haunting graveyards, and of course that unsettling feeling of having an extra body in the room with us. I still can't explain it, but I know what I felt. Could it have been a ghost? I don't know, but I can't shake the feeling that there's something in that old mansion, something tied to the land itself, watching and waiting. When I was in my second year of college, I found myself living in a small weathered apartment on the outskirts of Pine Creek, a town nestled in the middle of nowhere. The apartment was relatively new, nothing ancient or haunted about it, or so I thought. It had been built just a few years before I moved in, and I shared it with 3 roommates, Sarah, Michael, and Kyle. Sarah had lived there the year before, while Michael and I moved in at the same time. Kyle, a quiet guy who had just transferred from out of state, had the bedroom next to mine. In the beginning, nothing out of the ordinary happened. The place felt normal. It was a classic student apartment, worn around the edges but nothing too off-putting. But after a few weeks, things started to shift. It all began on one of those quiet evenings when we were all gathered in the living room, sprawled out on the couch. We were watching the latest episode of a show when we noticed something strange. The remote control was lying on the floor beneath the TV stand, turned upside down with its back removed. And strangely enough, there were no batteries in it. The TV volume was set low, so I casually mentioned it and asked if anyone would mind turning it up. No one moved, so we just continued watching. Then, to our surprise, the volume bar on the TV screen started moving on its own. Slowly, steadily, it rose until it reached the perfect level. We all froze, eyes glued to the TV. We couldn't explain it. At first, we tried to brush it off as a glitch, but it felt wrong. After a few moments, we joked that maybe the apartment was haunted, but not by anything malicious, just something with a sense of humor, or maybe just curious. The next few nights were filled with strange noises. I didn't hear the usual sounds you'd expect from a student apartment complex, like footsteps or muffled voices through the thin walls. These noises were different, almost mechanical. It sounded like the ticking of an old clock or a machine winding up in the distance. It wasn't constant, but every so often, I'd hear a faint rhythmic ticking coming from within the walls. It felt like something was moving behind the plaster, turning over and over. One night, things took a much stranger turn. I had just crawled into bed, trying to drift off to sleep, when a sudden thud echoed from behind my head, against the wall. It was sharp and loud, breaking the eerie stillness of the room. I sat up in bed, heart pounding, unsure of what had just happened. Then I heard something else. It began with a small tremor, a slight shake of my closet door. I stared at it, trying to make sense of the movement. Suddenly, the doorknob to my bedroom door began to twist rapidly, like someone was trying to force their way in. The knob stopped abruptly, but just as I thought it was over, the bathroom door, just to my right, started its own strange turn. Rapid, persistent. That's when my heart started racing in earnest. Next, the old VCR sitting beside the bathroom door powered on by itself. It flickered to life, then just as quickly powered down. It wasn't a malfunction. It was as if someone had intentionally pressed the button. The window next to the VCR rattled too, almost as if something outside was shaking it with force. Then, another thud. A second one, just as loud and distinct as the first. The whole sequence of events happened again and again. The closet door shaking, the doorknobs twisting, the VCR flickering on and off, the window vibrating. The movement seemed deliberate, like some invisible entity was tracing a circle of activity around my room. It went around 3 times before everything stopped, just like that, without warning. I lay there, wide awake, not knowing what to make of it. This wasn't just a random noise in the night. This felt purposeful, as if something had mapped out its path, moving deliberately through the room. It was as though time itself had somehow looped around me. After that night, things quieted down. The strange noises ceased, and nothing else happened in my bedroom. The others didn't report anything similar in their rooms either. But the living room TV continued to act up from time to time, flickering and turning itself up when no one was watching. Eventually, I moved out of the apartment. Life moved on, and the bizarre happenings faded into memory. But there's still a part of me that wonders, was there something in that place, something from before we moved in? Or was it simply a trick of the mind? A random collection of strange events that lined up a little too perfectly? To this day, I don't know, but I still sometimes wonder if that apartment, like some old house, held on to something that hadn't yet let go. Hey everyone, I put a lot of effort and heart into creating these videos just for you. If you're enjoying the content, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a quick comment below and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Your support means the world to me, and it keeps me motivated to bring more awesome videos your way. Ever since I was a kid, I've had a strange connection to spirits. I can't explain it, but there's always been this heightened sensitivity within me. And while I've had some pretty terrifying encounters, I'll admit I'm still a bit afraid of ghosts. It all began when I was around 9 years old. I was staying over at my mom's place for the weekend. Usually, I lived with my grandmother, but my mom let me have a friend, Emily, stay the night. We were in my room, curled up watching a scary movie, when suddenly, everything went dark. The lights just flickered off, leaving us in complete blackness. We froze, too terrified to speak, when we heard the creak of the door to my room slowly opening. It swung wide, and there, standing in the doorway, was a tall, shadowy figure. It took a slow step forward, and panic shot through me. I screamed, "Mom!" As soon as I yelled, the figure vanished without a trace. My mom came rushing into the room, asking what had happened. I was so scared I thought she'd think I was just imagining things, so Emily and I just told her we were freaked out because the lights went out. My mom walked over to the light switch and pointed out something strange. The lights hadn't just gone out. They'd been switched off. Neither Emily nor I had even moved near the switch, and the realization hit us like a wave of dread. After that night, I refused to go back into that room, or even back to my mom's house. That was 6 years ago, but my strange experiences with spirits didn't stop there. A friend of mine, Natalie, who has the same sensitivity to spirits, once told me I had something, or someone, following me. She described it as a shadow. She explained that when spirits appear to her, they often start as shadows, revealing their full forms only when they choose to. At first, I didn't want to believe her, mostly because of my own terrifying experiences. But she assured me there was no reason to fear. Shadows, she explained, feed on fear. The more scared we get, the more they thrive. Over time, Natalie shared more about the spirit she sensed around me. She even told me its name, Cade, and described what he looked like. I've never seen him in full, but I've caught glimpses of him, always in shadow. At first, his presence unnerved me, but after a while, I got used to it. Sometimes he surprises me, but he's never done me harm. In fact, in a strange way, I feel safer when he's around. When I'm alone, I find myself talking to Cade, though he rarely answers me. But somehow, I've come to think of him as a kind of friend. I know some people might think I'm crazy, but I've faced death a few times in my life, and I truly believe it's given me a deeper sensitivity to spirits. Whether it's from those experiences or something else entirely, I know what I see and feel is real. Cade is a good spirit, and I trust that he won't hurt me. I've learned to accept his presence as just another part of my life. Everyone has something from childhood that they just can't let go of. For me, it's always been Teddy, a worn-out bear I've had since I was little. My mom picked him up from a local store in Pine Lake, a small town in upstate New York where I grew up. At first glance, Teddy seems perfectly ordinary, just a simple stuffed animal. But even now, as I approach the end of high school, I still hold him close at night. Lately, though, I've started to wonder if all those years of emotional connection might have somehow brought him to life. The signs aren't big, flashy moments, but subtle things you can't dismiss. Sometimes when I cuddle Teddy, I swear I can feel his little arms squeeze me gently back, something no ordinary teddy bear should ever do. Occasionally, I place him on my desk and look away, only to find him closer to me when I turn back. It usually happens if I've ignored him for a day or two, almost like a quiet reminder he's still there. The strangest things happen whenever my mom or younger brother, Alex, enter my room without permission, especially if I'm out. Mom has always been sensitive to paranormal activities and has told me she experiences weird things around Teddy. Once when I accidentally left him in her bedroom, she later confessed she saw a shadow shake just like Teddy swoop from the ceiling, grazing the top of her head. She spun around to find him sitting innocently on her bed, like nothing ever happened. But Teddy doesn't stop there. My mom swears that if he's left alone with her, he starts whispering my name, quietly at first, then louder, repeatedly asking where I am. Eventually, it unnerves her enough to toss him back into my room, or directly at me, if she's especially irritated. Alex had only one experience, but it definitely stuck with him. One afternoon, while I was out with friends, he sneaked into my room to borrow a game. According to him, Teddy actually stood upright on my bed and charged straight at him. Alex didn't stick around to see what would happen next and has avoided my room ever since. Strangely enough, none of these things frightened me. They intrigued me instead. When I was younger, I jokingly suggested Teddy might be haunted, but recently my curiosity has deepened. Mom and my best friend Sarah, who also has a knack for sensing spirits, have tossed around some theories. The one that resonates most with me is the idea that Teddy isn't actually possessed at all, but might somehow be connected directly to my energy. This theory fits surprisingly well. Mom says Teddy remains calm and quiet when he's with me, almost peaceful. The only exception is when she enters my room to wake me in the morning. Then she swears he glares at her, silently warning her to leave me alone. Teddy isn't even the only stuffed animal in my room acting strangely. I once had a small porcelain clown doll that moved on its own until Mom threatened to toss it into the fireplace, prompting me to lock it securely in my desk drawer. Then there's my oversized stuffed panda, which surprised me one night when I tried retrieving a necklace I'd hidden behind it. The panda swung its massive arm and knocked me back, almost as if protecting the jewelry. It hasn't moved since, but I haven't tried disturbing it again either. Unlike my other toys, Teddy remains consistently active. He watches over my room with an almost protective vigilance, occasionally making his presence known to anyone stepping into my space uninvited. I can't help but wonder, is Teddy genuinely haunted, or is he bound to me in ways I can't quite grasp? One night, Sarah slept over and later confessed she heard a deep male voice murmuring softly in another language. She thought she heard me respond, softly reassuring him everything was all right. She isn't entirely sure if it was a dream or reality, but the vividness of the experience stayed with her. And now it stays with me too. Whatever the real explanation, Teddy is far more than a childhood memento. Whether tied to my emotions, my energy, or something else entirely, he's become a vital part of my life. Truthfully, I can't imagine going forward without him. Have you ever experienced anything similar? Or is it just me who has a teddy bear that might be something more? The women in my family have always had something unusual about them. My mom and grandmother could always sense things, like ghosts, and they had this uncanny ability to know the gender of a baby long before anyone else had even thought about it. For a while, I thought maybe the gifts skipped a generation, but then something from my childhood resurfaced. Back when we lived in our old house, I used to talk to ghosts all the time, and at the time, it seemed completely normal. I was only 3, so I didn't think twice about it. It wasn't until we moved away that I stopped seeing them altogether. Years later, we made a trip to Missouri to bury my grandfather beside my grandmother. It was during the funeral when something strange happened. As we stood there, I saw the faces of long-gone relatives who had come to pay their respects. They were standing among us, but no one else could see them. Even though I've had experiences like this in the past, now it feels like there's a wall between me and that side of myself. It's odd, because while some people might feel relieved not to see things others can't, I actually find it frustrating and a bit heartbreaking. I'm convinced that I shut myself off from it, possibly because something scared me so badly I decided to block it all out. But now, I want to open myself up again. My main reason is to make contact, not just with the spirits who linger in our house to make sure I'm not disturbing their peace, but also with a spirit I've grown close to, Chazer, a psychic vampire. Last year, I found a strange store online selling spirit-bound jewelry. Curious, I clicked through their items and found a necklace listed under the vampire category. I had to have it. With my mom's blessing, I ordered it, excited to see what it would be like. But when the necklace arrived, I felt disappointed. It wasn't exactly like the one I thought I had bought. Still, when I held it, something in me shifted. I felt complete in a way I couldn't explain. I was so drawn to it that I didn't mind the small disappointment at all. That same week, I was struggling with awful shoulder pain from too many hours spent working from home. Balancing school and everything else had me stressed, and my shoulder was a constant reminder of how badly I was pushing myself. One night, after saying goodnight to my family and letting my dog, Tess, out to do her business, I went to bed. Tess, always by my side, curled up beside me. She's always been a nervous dog. Her past with previous owners wasn't kind, and it left her jumpy, especially around new people. But with me, she never acted that way. She never barked at the spirits in our house. That night, I drifted off to sleep, the pain in my shoulder still there but fading into the background as I slipped into that strange half-sleep. I was almost fully asleep when I felt something. A light, gentle touch, right where my shoulder had been aching. The sensation was slow and soothing, as if someone was trying to ease the pain. For a moment, I didn't register what was happening, but then it hit me. Someone, or something, was touching me. I shot up in bed, my hand going instinctively to my shoulder, but the room was empty. It was dark, but I could see clearly, and Tess was lying there next to me, wide awake and alert as always. Even though I knew no one was physically there, the feeling lingered. It felt like Chazer had been trying to comfort me, and I panicked. Maybe I had reacted too quickly. Maybe I'd hurt or startled him. The guilt hit me immediately, and in the stillness of the room, I cried quietly. The only way I can communicate with Chazer is through my best friend, Sam, who practices Wicca. For the longest time, Chazer wouldn't speak to Sam at all. He wanted me to figure out how to connect with him by myself. I tried to explain, through Sam, that I didn't know how, but he was stubborn. Eventually, Chazer relented, and Sam began to hear his messages again. She relays his emotions to me, but it's not the same. I long to reach out to him myself. It's painful knowing that he's with me, but I can't speak to him directly. He was part of my life in a past existence, and there's so much I need to ask him, not just about the past, but about everything. I've tried so hard to tear down the barriers I've put up around myself, but nothing seems to work. It's like I'm stuck in a place where I can't move forward. I know Chazer is waiting for me to make that first move, but it's so difficult. Do you have any advice on how I can reconnect with that world? How do I let go of the walls I've built? Any guidance would mean the world to both of us. The following events took place at an elementary school in Silver Springs, Colorado, between 2009 and 2011, while I worked as the computer lab assistant. These experiences remain vivid, personal, and unsettling. Although the school itself was built in 1985, not exactly old by historical standards, the land always felt oddly quiet, as if it held memories of things long forgotten. The lab sat isolated at the rear of the building, far from the noise and laughter of the main halls, making the silence feel heavy. One morning, while guiding a kindergarten class through a basic typing exercise, a little girl named Emily suddenly ran up to me in tears. Her eyes were wide with fear, but her English wasn't fluent enough for her to clearly express herself. Another student translated, and I felt a chill crawl down my spine when Emily whispered, "I saw the her." Something about the odd phrasing, the mixture of innocent confusion and genuine terror, felt deeply unsettling. When I asked her where, Emily silently pointed towards the storage room, a place I would later dread entering alone. Weeks passed, and I began to dismiss the encounter until one afternoon when the custodian, Mike, helped me stack boxes of printer paper neatly inside the storage room. We spent hours organizing everything meticulously. Yet about 2 weeks later, when I opened the storage room for supplies, my heart skipped a beat. The room was in utter chaos. Boxes scattered wildly, some tipped sideways, others piled haphazardly onto the small server desk, and a few completely emptied across the floor. Mike swore he hadn't touched anything since that day, and the genuine confusion on his face convinced me he was telling the truth. It made no sense, and the unsettling memory of Emily's frightened face resurfaced. Things grew stranger still one winter morning when I arrived early to boot up the computers. In the center of the lab, neatly piled, was a small pyramid of sand. Perplexed, I called Mike immediately, assuming he'd cleaned the room overnight. When he arrived, he seemed just as puzzled as I was, insisting that cleaning was scheduled for that evening, not the night before. Mike vacuumed the sand carefully, but oddly, The vacuum didn't make any sound of debris being picked up. Stranger yet, no trace of sand was found anywhere else in the lab, as if it had appeared spontaneously. But the most chilling experience occurred later that year while filming student council speeches. My job included recording these speeches for the school's internal broadcast. One afternoon, Sarah, a bright fifth grader dealing bravely with the recent loss of her mother, delivered an exceptional speech. During the recording, everything went perfectly, and I congratulated her warmly afterward. But later, reviewing the footage, my blood ran cold. Halfway through Sarah's speech, the screen abruptly went black, accompanied by a deep, echoing thud, like something had forcefully struck the camera. For nearly 20 seconds, only muffled static and unsettling whispers filled the audio. Then, without explanation, the footage resumed clearly, as if nothing had occurred. Slowing down the video frame by frame revealed something that made my heart stop. A brief flash of strange, pale light flickered in the corner, then complete darkness engulfed the screen. Just as suddenly, the image returned to normal, and Sarah's smiling face reappeared. When I nervously mentioned these incidents to one of the longtime teachers, Mrs. Carter, she hardly seemed fazed. With calm familiarity, she replied, "Oh yes, they're always around here." Her casual acceptance made the situation feel even more unnerving, leaving me to wonder how many others silently shared these experiences. I never pursued the school's history further, choosing instead to live with the uneasy uncertainty of what might still be lurking there. What do you think could explain these occurrences? Have you ever experienced something similar? About 10 years ago, a friend of mine moved into a new housing development in a small town that had been nothing but an overgrown field for as long as I could remember. At first, it didn't seem like a big deal, just another neighborhood sprouting up out of nowhere. But for us, being 18 and on the verge of adulthood, it felt like a new chapter. His house quickly became the go-to place for weekend parties and late-night hangouts. We threw a bunch of wild keggers, crashed there often, and I'm sure we drove him a little crazy in the process. But after a couple of years, keeping up with the house became a lot for him, especially after his previous roommate moved out. That's when I decided to move in. I started with just a few things to avoid intruding too much, gradually bringing in more over the next couple of years. About a month after moving in, I woke up from a particularly unsettling dream. In it, I was working at a haunted hotel with a few of my friends. The details were disturbingly vivid, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. But I shrugged it off, trying to convince myself it was just a nightmare. That is, until I checked the time. It was around 3 a.m., wide awake. I turned over and glanced at my dresser. What I saw next froze me to the core. There, hovering above the dresser, or rather, inside it, was a figure. It looked like a short woman with long, tangled hair, her head seemingly resting on top of the dresser. Her hair hung down on either side, still and unruffled, despite the faint breeze from the fan. I stared at it for what felt like hours, completely paralyzed with fear. Finally, I mustered enough courage to move. Keeping my eyes locked on the figure, I crept toward the light switch and flipped it on. The moment the light flickered to life, she vanished. I flipped the light off and on again, but no matter what I did, I couldn't bring her back. The vividness of what I had seen was too real to dismiss. The only thing I could make out was her long, dark hair, and I couldn't forget it. Shaken, I fled to the living room and watched some late-night TV to take my mind off it. Eventually, I fell asleep on the couch with the lights on. The next day, I told my friend about it. He wasn't exactly surprised, but he did find the story interesting. We shrugged it off, though, and I tried my best to make peace with the unsettling experience. A month later, I was sitting in the living room again, watching TV late at night. I had a nice buzz going from a few beers. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw what I thought was my roommate walking down the hall from his room toward mine. I assumed he was going to do some laundry, but then I saw him turn into my room. Curious, I glanced toward the door, but before I could speak, I heard a loud, sharp popping sound, like glass shattering. "What are you doing?" I shouted, only to almost jump out of my skin when I heard his voice coming from behind me on the opposite couch. He hadn't moved at all. We both got up and went to my room to investigate. What we found was bizarre. The bulb in my lamp had shattered cleanly in half. The glass was fused with the plastic in a way I had never seen before. The lamp was completely ruined. When we tried turning it on, it only smoked and popped again. The whole situation felt off, especially after seeing what I thought was a figure walking toward my room. One night, we were both half asleep in the living room when my roommate suddenly shouted, "Watch out." I snapped awake and asked him what happened. He just stared at the ceiling, eyes wide with fear, and said he'd seen a large figure crawling along the ceiling. He said it had dropped right above my head. That gave me chills. I began to feel like something was targeting me, but my roommate had his own disturbing experience to share. He'd had an episode of sleep paralysis and described seeing a man with antlers on his head and cloven hooves for feet. The figure moved around his room, stopping at the foot of his bed. He remembered trying to fight it off, waking up with his sheets twisted around his arm, as though he had been swinging them at the figure. He was so shaken that he slept on the couch for a whole month afterward. A few weeks later, my girlfriend and her 2-year-old son came over to visit. In the middle of the night, her son woke up, crawled to the bed, and pointed toward the closet, crying uncontrollably. He kept repeating, "Eyes, eyes." No matter how hard she tried to calm him down, he refused to go back into my room after that. She eventually stopped visiting, which only left me more frustrated with whatever was haunting the house. I decided I couldn't stay there anymore and moved out. My friend was disappointed, but he understood. After I left, my friend got a dog from a friend who needed to rehome it. The dog gave him some comfort, but every now and then, it would growl at seemingly nothing or run down the hall toward my old room, barking at the door like something, or someone, was there. My friend checked the room countless times, finding nothing, but eventually, he just ignored it. Recently, another roommate moved in, and he also adopted a stray dog. It was a small black lab mix, and it gave me the creeps. It acted almost like a cat, always darting around and acting strange. The first time I saw it, I had an irrational thought. What if it's a demon? I know it sounds crazy. I've done enough research to know that's not likely, but something about the dog just feels wrong. Not long ago, my friends were hanging out outside, and the black dog started barking at the glass door. When they turned to look, they saw a shadowy figure slowly moving down the hall toward my old room. Even now, the house still holds a strange, eerie energy. The new roommate has admitted that he sometimes feels uneasy about his closet at night. He's a grown man, not easily scared, but he said that he wakes up in the middle of the night and hides under the covers, drenched in sweat, gripped by fear. I still visit the house from time to time, but every time I do, I'm on edge, wondering if I'll encounter something again. Hey everyone, I put a lot of effort and heart into creating these videos just for you. If you're enjoying the content, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a quick comment below and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Your support means the world to me, and it keeps me motivated to bring more awesome videos your way. This past weekend, I headed out to a small, quiet town called Pine Lake, Arizona, for a tradition I've shared with some close friends for years. Pine Lake, an old town steeped in mystery and a deep, haunted past, has a reputation for being home to more restless spirits than living souls. This time, we decided to try something different, staying at a quirky spot called the Desert Oasis Campground. Nestled between an ancient cemetery and a desolate stretch of road, the campground offers vintage trailers from the 1950s that you can rent. We chose the Tiki Wagon, a converted 1947 bus with a tropical Polynesian vibe, complete with tiki gods on the walls and grass carpeting inside. It seemed like a fun change, but little did I know, this place would become part of a memory I'll never forget. We arrived on Friday evening, admiring the colorful outdoor bar and the quirky antiques scattered inside the bus, vintage records, strange 1950s lamps, and faded old postcards from the town's mining days. After settling in and relaxing, we decided to call it a night. The Tiki Wagon had 2 beds, one a full-size twin mattress and a smaller twin, both facing each other. I shared the larger bed with one of my friends, opting to sleep closest to the wall. The wind was fierce that night, and the trees around the bus rattled against its sides, creating an eerie, almost unnatural sound. I managed to drift off for a while, but it wasn't long before I woke up, unable to get comfortable. As I lay there, trying to calm my restless mind, I suddenly heard a faint sound, nails scraping down the side of the mattress. The noise reminded me of my childhood pet ferret trying to jump onto the bed, but losing her grip. Only my ferret wasn't there with me. This was different though. The scratching wasn't on the metal frame of the bed. It was on the fabric. My heart sank as I tried to convince myself it was just the wind. But this noise was right there, only inches away from my face. My pulse quickened, and I tried to stay calm. But then, I felt something moving inside the mattress. Slowly, like it was crawling toward me. The sensation was subtle at first, but unmistakable. I prayed silently, repeating the Lord's Prayer in my head, trying to convince myself that it was just the old springs creaking. But then I felt something more. It was like the sensation of spider webs brushing against my face, and then, like someone gently sprinkling sand over me. I wiped at my face repeatedly, but there was nothing there. Cold dread gripped me as I cycled through every prayer I could remember, hoping to find comfort in the familiar words until the sensations finally stopped. When the sun rose, I felt a flood of relief, as if the night had lifted off me. After one of my friends went to shower, I pulled the other aside and told her about what had happened. We decided to investigate, lifting the mattress to see what was underneath. To our shock, the mattress wasn't a traditional spring mattress, but a thin futon mattress with no springs at all. So much for that theory. I briefly wondered if perhaps an animal had gotten inside through the wheel well, but the wheels weren't anywhere near where we were sleeping. I didn't mention the feeling of sand on my face. I didn't want to worry her any more than I already had. The rest of the day was spent exploring Pine Lake, checking out the local shops and art galleries. We celebrated my birthday at the Copper Queen Inn, a historic hotel that dates back to 1902. Known for its eerie history and ghost stories, the hotel is one of Arizona's oldest continuously operating establishments. I couldn't help but feel a sense of foreboding as we ate, knowing that ghost hunters had even visited the hotel years ago. After dinner, we enjoyed drinks on the outdoor patio, watching the passing crowd. But when I went to use the restroom, things took a strange turn. While I was in one of the stalls, I heard the toilet in the next stall flush, except there was no one else in the restroom. I checked, but there wasn't a soul in sight. It was unsettling, to say the least, and I rushed back to join my friends. By the time nightfall arrived, the thought of returning to the Tiki wagon was unsettling. I even considered sleeping in my friend's car, but we stayed up late playing dominoes, trying to shake off the unease. Eventually, it was time to sleep. I took the smaller twin bed, and the friend I had shared my experience with decided to sleep in the bed I had been in earlier. I tried to sleep, but sometime in the middle of the night, I was jolted awake by a gasp or a scream from my friend who had taken my spot. I asked her if she was okay, and she claimed it was just a nightmare. The next morning, she told me that she had dreamed she was being buried alive in a coffin and could feel the sand slowly being poured over her. I froze, feeling a chill rush down my spine. I had never told her about the sensation of sand, and I hadn't intended to. I didn't want to frighten her further. The rest of the trip was uneventful, but that night stayed with me like a lingering shadow I couldn't shake. What really happened at the Desert Oasis campground? What was it that we felt, and why did my friend's dream mirror my own experience so closely? The questions linger, unanswered, as I try to shake off the memory. When I was 14, I had an experience that I can't ever forget. It's a story I've only shared with a few people, and this is the first time I'm putting it down in writing. Even my brother, now a soldier with nerves of steel, still gets uneasy when he thinks about that night. Every summer, I spent a few weeks at my grandmother's house in a small, rural town in Arizona. The peaceful desert landscape, with its endless, golden sunsets, was always a welcome escape from the bustle of city life. I loved being there, eating her homemade tortillas and fried bread, listening to her tell old stories and soaking in the quiet stillness of the area. My grandma would sometimes hire a local man to help around the house. He was known as the town drunk, harmless but a bit of a character. One evening, just before the sun began to set, she asked me to drive him home. His place was about 5 miles down the road, and I was excited. After all, getting to drive a truck at 14 was a big deal. On those back roads, no one really cared how old you were or if you had a license. Out here, there wasn't anyone around to notice. My 9-year-old brother joined me on the ride, sitting next to me in the truck's cab, while the worker and our dog hopped into the bed. The drive there was uneventful, and I dropped him off at his rundown house, a little shack nestled among the sprawling desert. I turned the truck around and headed back toward my grandmother's, the sky already glowing with a fiery red hue from the setting sun. The radio hummed faint tunes from the nearest station in Flagstaff, and we kicked up a trail of dust behind us as we cruised along the dirt road. It was peaceful, at first. As we drove, I noticed something moving in the bushes on the right side of the road. I slowed down, thinking it was a deer or a coyote, but nothing emerged. I brushed it off and kept going. That's when it hit me, a sudden wave of dread and terror. It came from nowhere, and I couldn't explain it, but deep down, I knew something wasn't right. Then I saw it. I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw the dark shape of something tall, skinny, and covered in fur running after us. It wasn't human, not even close. My brother started crying, and our dog was barking like crazy, her focus locked on whatever was chasing us. I slammed my foot on the gas, the truck bouncing over the uneven dirt road, but no matter how fast I went, it kept gaining on us. My brother's voice shook as he screamed, "It's getting closer on your side." I was scared out of my mind, gripping the wheel, praying we'd make it out alive. The creature was right there now, almost at the side of the truck, and I thought for sure this was the end. But just as we rounded a bend, headlights appeared ahead, a car coming in the opposite direction. Relief flooded over me as the creature disappeared into the shadows, just like that. It was gone, as if it had never existed. Shaken, but alive, we made it back to my grandmother's house. We didn't even stop to look back as we ran inside and slammed the door behind us. Gasping for air, we told her everything that had happened. To our surprise, she didn't seem shocked at all. Instead, she calmly began sharing old stories we had heard before. Stories of dark magic, witches, and the Navajo legend of the Yi-Nau-Lushi, or skinwalkers. Hearing her talk about it made the experience feel all the more real, and my fear only deepened. That night, I stayed away from the windows. I didn't dare look outside, afraid of what I might see out there in the darkness. For years after, I refused to drive out there at night. It wasn't until I turned 21 that I felt brave enough to return to those roads in the dark. Even now, the memory of that night still sends chills down my spine. For those who might not know, skinwalkers are said to be evil beings, men or spirits who use dark magic to harm others. It might sound far-fetched, but I'm telling you, they are real. If there's light in the world, there's darkness too. And that night, I'm certain we came face to face with that darkness. I just turned 22, and over the years, I've experienced some unexplainable events that still haunt me today. I know others have gone through similar things, and maybe sharing my story will help us all find some answers. It began when I was around 13. At the time, I was the oldest of 4 siblings, living with my parents, 3 younger brothers, and baby sister in an old 2-story house in Silver Springs, Colorado. Our home was built in 1915, originally serving as a farmhouse before being remodeled several times. My bedroom was in the basement, making me the only one sleeping downstairs. One afternoon, I had 2 of my best friends over, Sarah and Michael. We were sitting cross-legged on a worn carpet in front of an old television, chatting and half watching some comedy show. My room was dimly lit, with small basement windows covered up, leaving only the TV's soft glow. Without warning, the screen went black, plunging us into complete darkness. Sarah laughed nervously, while Michael fumbled for his phone. But then, something shifted. As my eyes adjusted, A face slowly emerged from the shadows, drifting silently toward me. It glowed faintly in a pale, ghostly blue-gray hue. The face belonged to an older man, his eyes sunken and hollow, his beard scraggly, and his gaze cold and piercing. There was no body beneath, just this floating apparition approaching slowly. My heart raced, and my throat tightened, locking my voice in fear. Barely able to whisper what I was seeing, Sarah and Michael immediately bolted from the room, their quick escape allowing a sliver of hallway light to spill in. As soon as it did, the face vanished, leaving me trembling and alone in the basement darkness. I refused to sleep in that basement room afterward, eventually relocating upstairs, but the presence seemed to follow. At 16, I sat alone in my new room upstairs, listening to music beneath warm sunlight streaming through my window. I had just switched off my radio and my eyes drifted to an empty soda can on the bookshelf near the light switch. Out of nowhere, the switch flicked downward by itself, dimming the room slightly. Seconds later, the soda can crushed inward violently, as if an invisible hand clenched it tight. Heart pounding, I fled downstairs, breathless as I told my family what happened. When I finally gathered courage to return, the can was still there, crushed in a way no human hand could replicate. My mom suggested it was her mother's spirit, trying to communicate from beyond, but I couldn't shake the feeling it was the same entity I'd seen years before. For months afterward, sleep became elusive. The constant, oppressive sensation of being watched was overwhelming, yet I had no answers or logical explanations. These experiences were vivid, clear, and disturbingly real. I'd never struggled with drugs or mental health issues. These were genuine encounters. Although the strange activity has calmed in recent years, I still sense that something lingers nearby, especially when alone. Our large family home had always been eerie. Built in the early 1900s, it was converted from old apartments into a single-family dwelling. Living with my parents and siblings, strange phenomena were a regular part of life. We often heard footsteps upstairs when nobody was there, and my mother's antique music box would play spontaneously, its porcelain rose spinning gently on its own. Doors unlatched themselves, slowly creaking open, and an unsettling sensation of being watched hovered constantly. The room above our living room had a billiard table, and whenever my sister and I were home alone, we'd hear pool balls softly clacking, as though an invisible player moved them around. Most chilling was hearing a faint male voice whispering my name when no one else was around. Only I ever heard it. Even our family dog, Samson, a large husky, seemed to sense something disturbing. Whenever we left home, we'd return to find him terrified, trembling under the dining room table, messes scattered around as if he'd been deeply frightened. Often, when reaching for the kitchen door, the blinds would snap up abruptly, startling us. My parents always attempted logical explanations, trying to soothe our fears, but deep down, they knew something unnatural was at work. Years later, my mother finally opened up about her own unsettling experiences. One afternoon, while alone in the kitchen cooking, she'd sent my father to the grocery store, accompanied by me and my sister. While preparing dinner, she distinctly heard the side door slam shut, followed by my father's voice clearly calling out, "Hello." It was one of those late evenings when the house felt unusually still. I went to check, but by the time I reached the hallway, the door was empty. When I peered out the window, the car still wasn't in the driveway. It was one of the creepiest things that happened right before we moved out. I had a vivid dream one night, one I can still remember like it was yesterday. A little boy and girl with brown hair, dressed in old-fashioned clothes from another time, stood at the foot of my bed, watching me sleep. They didn't speak. They just stared at me with sad, empty eyes. I woke up in a cold sweat and immediately told my mom about it. But before I could finish explaining, she stopped me. She asked me questions like, did they have brown hair? Was the girl taller? Were they dressed in old-fashioned clothes? I couldn't believe it when she described them exactly the same way they had appeared in my dream. As it turned out, my dad had also had a similar experience. He dreamt that he was sleeping on the couch in the living room and woke up to find the same two children staring at him from across the room. It wasn't long before things started to get even stranger. I was about 13, maybe 14, when my sister and I had two cousins over. We were all just hanging out in her room, trying to pass the time. Someone brought up the idea of making a homemade Ouija board, and before we knew it, we were all sitting in a circle asking questions. The last question I asked was, "If someone's really here with us, can you give us a sign?" The moment the words left my mouth, we heard a loud crash, a sound like glass shattering. All four of us turned to the two windows in my sister's room that faced the street. The window on the right was completely shattered, and there was glass everywhere. But here's the thing, there was no sign of anything outside. The screen on the window was completely intact, and there was nothing on the ground outside. My dad went out to investigate, but there was nothing. He didn't believe our story, thinking we might have accidentally broken the window ourselves. But the screen showed no signs of damage, and nothing outside seemed to make sense. That incident was like the beginning of a series of darker and more unsettling events in the house. I was about 14 when it happened. I came home from school early one day and had the house to myself for a couple of hours before my parents and sister got back. I was sitting on the couch watching TV when suddenly, this overwhelming sense of being watched hit me. It wasn't the usual kind of feeling. This time, it was as if someone was right in front of me, glaring at me with intense hatred. Fear took over. I bolted out the front door and ran across the street to a neighbor's house without even bothering to close the door behind me. I didn't return until my mom arrived, frantic, searching for me. I still don't know why I ran, but the feeling was undeniable. The last event I clearly remember occurred when my sister and I were both in our early teens. Her room was upstairs, right next to mine. One night she was lying in bed, struggling to fall asleep, when she heard soft tapping on her door. The door slowly creaked open, and when she looked up, she saw a shadowy figure standing there. The figure turned and walked down the hallway toward our parents' room. Thinking it was one of them, she got up and went to check. But when she opened their door, it was dark and empty. She ran downstairs and found them in the living room, watching TV. They hadn't been upstairs. Terrified, my sister ended up sleeping in my room for the next few weeks. We finally moved when I was 15, but a few months later, the house was set on fire. Someone had thrown a Molotov cocktail through a window. In all honesty, I was thankful for it. That house had been a source of so much fear. The experience still haunts me. I've had nightmares about that house, and I often wonder what might have been going on there. For years, I've wanted to look into the history of the house to find out if something happened there before we moved in, but I'm not sure how to begin. If anyone has any suggestions, I'd really appreciate it. And if anyone has any theories about what might have been happening, I'd love to hear them. I'm still not sure if I believe in ghosts, but I've had enough strange experiences to keep me wondering. One of the oddest happened the summer after I moved out of my parents' house. I was dating a guy who lived with his mom in the country. It was a small, quiet town in central Washington, Ellensburg, population 5,000, without the college crowd during the summer. We'd throw parties at his house when his mom was away, and there wasn't much else to do. One night during a party in the basement, someone mentioned the troublemaking ghost at his house. I had no idea what they were talking about. "What ghost?" I asked, and they started telling strange stories. Glasses knocking off tables, objects flying across the room, doors opening and closing by themselves. Keep in mind, there were no pets in the house, no cats, and the dogs stayed outside. One person said that the ghost seemed to dislike girls. A mutual friend told us about a time when she was in the basement with my boyfriend. She said aloud, "Your ghost is real." Just moments later, a book fell off a shelf and hit her in the head. I shrugged it off, thinking it was just coincidence. People love to believe in ghosts in old houses, and I'd lived in one from the early 1900s without any issues. Sure, I was terrified of my closet as a kid, but that was because my mom had once told me there was enough space for 2 coffins between my closet and theirs. There were 2 rooms in my boyfriend's house that I never went in, his mom's room and the guest bedroom. The doors were always shut, and there wasn't any reason for me to go inside. A few nights after hearing about the ghost, I had a strange dream. I was standing in the guest room staring into an oval mirror with a slight patina. The face staring back wasn't mine. I reached down to grab my coat from the lofted bed, and suddenly everything vanished. Then I was outside behind an old church, laughing and playing in the snow with my boyfriend. We were tossing snowballs at each other, and then he pushed me into a snowbank, something I'd grown up calling whitewashing. But then things got strange. I stood above us watching as he buried me in snow. When he turned to smile at me, I realized the girl he had buried in the snow was in my body. I vaguely remember my boyfriend appearing in a soldier's uniform, though it's hard to remember clearly. This happened more than 10 years ago, and I can still remember the unsettling feeling that the ghost woman saw him as someone from her past. I woke up in a cold sweat, trying to shake off the fear. At the time, I figured it was just a weird dream. The next morning, I told my boyfriend, Michael, that his ghost probably didn't like girls because she had a crush on him. He asked, raising an eyebrow. Yeah, I explained, feeling slightly embarrassed. I saw her in my dream. Curiosity getting the better of me, I asked, is there an old mirror hanging on the east wall of the guest room? Like an antique your mom might have found somewhere. He nodded slowly, clearly confused. Yeah, actually, she picked it up at some estate sale years ago. And is the bed elevated, kind of lofted, with a tall wardrobe near the door? I pressed. Exactly, he said, his eyes narrowing suspiciously. Can you show me? I insisted, suddenly feeling uneasy. He reluctantly led me to the guest room, and as soon as he opened the door, chills ran down my spine. Everything matched perfectly. The antique mirror, the lofted bed, the wardrobe. I'd never been inside that room before. I certainly wasn't imagining things after too many drinks. I was always the designated driver. This revelation wasn't entirely new to me. I've had dreams before that showed me places I'd never visited, only to see them later in real life. Still, each time it happened, it left me unsettled. Sometimes my dreams got stranger. I'd find myself looking into mirrors, only to see another person's face staring back. Or I'd hear people calling me by a different name, realizing that my body wasn't truly mine. These dreams left me feeling uneasy, as though reality was never fully in my grasp. Last fall, my mom and stepdad offered to let me stay rent-free in their new house in Pine Lake while I saved for my move to Europe. Taking advantage of the warm autumn weekend, I went garage sale hunting to find some furniture. At a small sale just off Main Street, a quirky little music box caught my eye. It was shaped like the Red Baron's plane, cartoonish but oddly unsettling. If you twist the propeller, the owner said with an odd smile, it plays a broken melody. Something about it compelled me, so I bought it. A week later, I settled into my new room, placing the strange music box on my nightstand. That night, I lay awake, trying to drift to sleep when suddenly, I felt a cold breath on the back of my neck. It was heavy and distinct, an audible exhale that paralyzed me with fear. I jumped from the bed, heart pounding, and flicked on the lights. But the room was empty. I ran crying to my mom's room, trying desperately to convince us both it was just a nightmare. Days passed, but anxiety filled me each time I returned home. What once felt comforting now seemed unwelcoming. I began sleeping on the couch some nights, avoiding my room entirely. One restless night, around 2:30 a.m., I scrolled aimlessly through my phone. Just as I finally closed my eyes, the Red Baron music box sprang to life, playing its broken, haunting tune. An icy chill gripped my stomach, freezing me in place. Summoning courage, I switched on the light, searching in vain for any explanation. The next day, convinced the music box was cursed, I decided to get rid of it. Feeling slightly foolish, I told the music box aloud that it wasn't welcome, disposing of it immediately. Then, quietly and discreetly, so my religious stepdad wouldn't notice, I cleansed my room. Initially, the heaviness lifted, bringing peace back to my space. But soon after, strange things started occurring elsewhere in the house. When my fiancé Ethan visited, he swore he heard sliding doors opening and strange banging noises when alone during the day. I brushed it off as appliances malfunctioning until my best friend Sarah stayed over. One night, we woke to the sound of glass shattering. Rushing into the kitchen, we discovered glasses mysteriously falling from the shelf above the sink, as though someone, or something, had deliberately pushed them. Things only escalated. One evening, while chatting with Ethan on the phone, an earplug suddenly shot from the hallway, striking my bedroom door with a loud snap. Nobody else was home, and my heart raced realizing that whatever presence lingered outside couldn't enter but desperately sought attention. The most terrifying moment occurred shortly before I left for Europe. Mom and I sat quietly in the living room watching a movie when, breaking the silence, we both heard a pained cry. A sharp, desperate yelp echoing clearly through the house. My heart stopped. Instantly, my mind raced to my stepdad, fearing he'd been hurt. I panicked, grabbing my phone and dialing 911 as I hurried to check on Michael. When we found him upstairs, he was completely fine and confused about why we were so frantic. We checked outside, but our isolated home on the outskirts of Pine Lake had no close neighbors, just the quiet rustling of wind through the trees. Yet I knew deep down the voice had come from inside our old farmhouse. When I told my mom, her eyes widened as she admitted softly, "I heard it too." For the first time, I felt relieved, validated in my fears. Curiosity led me to research our property. Turns out, our rural road had once been a busy trail used by pioneers heading west toward Spokane. Long before our home existed, an old farmhouse stood here in the early 1900s. It had been demolished to make way for our current house, a fact that unsettled me deeply. Interestingly, since we moved to an even older house built in the late 1800s, I haven't encountered anything strange again. But last year, my friend Sarah moved into her ex-husband Chris's guest cottage for a few months after their divorce. Chris's sprawling property sat atop a wooded hill overlooking Silver Springs, complete with a main house, a swimming pool, and a quaint little cottage. Their grown children, Emily, Jake, and Ava, often spent summers there. Chris generously offered Sarah the space while she was in transition. Sarah and the kids had repeatedly told me about the property's mysterious atmosphere, urging me to visit. Knowing my sensitivity to spiritual themes, they thought I'd sense whatever lingered there. They didn't suspect traditional ghosts, but believed in something else, something magical, perhaps fairies or woodland spirits. Emily once described seeing tiny glowing lights darting from an ancient tree into dense bushes, accompanied by gentle rustling. It couldn't have been fireflies. They aren't found in this part of Washington. Even stranger, Emily mentioned tapping sounds circling the windows of the sunroom where she slept, as though some unseen creature moved methodically around the perimeter. She believed it was an animal-like spirit, elusive but present. Intrigued but cautious, I decided to see for myself. Chris's property covered about 15 acres on a hillside, once home to thriving apple orchards now reclaimed by nature. A long gravel driveway lined with towering pines led up to a charming 3-bedroom house built in the early 1940s, with lush gardens, a lily-filled pond, and an old greenhouse draped in vines. Chris wasn't much of a gardener, so the grounds had grown wild, beautiful yet overwhelming. The further from the main house, the more unruly and enchanting the landscape became. Islands of aspen, birch, and fir trees surrounded sprawling flower beds, creating a mesmerizing maze reminiscent of the famous Winchester House Gardens, as if something were being kept at bay. About 50 feet from the main house sat the cozy pool cottage, with its inviting sunroom bedroom. My first visit was brief, but I was immediately drawn to a massive, ivy-covered oak tree towering above the cottage. Easily over a century old, its branches curved protectively around an open central space, forming a natural shelter. The tree radiated an authoritative yet comforting presence, though I instinctively felt no one should enter that sacred hollow. Later, I learned this was precisely where Emily had seen those glowing lights. On a subsequent daytime visit, I again sensed the tree's powerful yet benevolent energy. No ghosts here, just a profound, almost mystical aura emanating from the plants and surroundings. As I said goodbye to Sarah, something caught my attention near the fence line, a figure moving swiftly through the tall grass. Initially, I thought it might be a stray dog, but it was far stranger. The creature was about 4 feet long, its body shaggy and black, yet oddly proportioned, running quickly on legs barely 6 inches tall. It reminded me disturbingly of a huge, malformed corgi, darting gracefully into the landscape and disappearing. Sarah hadn't seen it, but my startled reaction spoke volumes. She simply smiled, saying, "If you ever figure out what's really here, please tell me." To this day, living quietly in rural Washington, I still wonder about what exactly inhabits Chris's land, and what mysteries linger unseen around us all. What do you think it was? My house sits at the end of a long gravel driveway, about 20 feet before you reach the front porch. Normally, there's a street lamp at the entrance, a typical county-installed pole light that brightens the road at night. But earlier this fall, the bulb burned out and the casing broke apart, plunging the driveway into complete darkness. Without the lamp, there's nothing but pitch-black darkness from the road all the way up to the house. There aren't any other lights for miles, only endless, silent darkness. My neighbors live pretty far apart. Only 3 homes dot our lonely country road, and they're mostly vacant during winter as families leave to escape the harsh cold. The nearest police station is a good 30-minute drive away. It's isolated, quiet, and not exactly the kind of place you'd want to be walking around alone at night. But apparently someone, or something, felt differently. One chilly October evening, I needed to grab my phone charger from the car. I've always dreaded the dark, so I rarely step outside at night, but this time I had no choice. I hurried down the steps, opened the car door, snatched up the charger, and turned quickly to head back inside. That's when I froze. At the far end of my driveway, bathed faintly in moonlight, stood a pale white figure of a man. He was too far away to make out clearly, about 6 or 7 car lengths, but he glowed softly, almost like a distant porch decoration lit for Halloween. Except there was no light source nearby, nothing to explain his eerie glow. He stood impossibly still, watching me. Initially, my heart jumped, thinking it might be the strange guide who had followed me earlier in the week. But this figure wasn't moving, wasn't breathing. He was just there, unmoving, like a statue. Every instinct in me screamed danger. Without breaking my gaze, I took quick backward steps, racing into the garage and slamming the door shut. Once inside, I bolted the front door behind me and called out, voice shaking, "Mom, there's someone in the driveway." She barely looked up, convinced I was overreacting because of the creepy stranger from earlier that week. "There's no one out there, Emily," she reassured me. But I knew what I saw. Later that night, peeking through the window, the figure had vanished as silently as he'd appeared. That night lingered in my thoughts, pushing me to believe this pale watcher wasn't human, at least not entirely. Weeks passed, and just when the memory started fading, something even stranger happened. One night, while lying awake in bed, I felt my fingers twitch. It wasn't me. They moved slowly, deliberately, bending inward and outward as though guided by unseen hands. Confused and scared, I rolled over quickly, and the sensation stopped. Then came the moment that haunts me still. I lifted myself slightly, glancing toward my desk across the room. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks in the dark, but when I blinked, the figure remained, a tall, shadowy silhouette of a man leaning casually against the desk, clearly outlined in the darkness. My breath caught. If I moved, would he move too? Fear surged, overwhelming caution. Quickly, I reached over and flicked on the bedside lamp. Instantly, the room flooded with light, and the figure vanished. The room stood empty, ordinary. Heart racing, I crept to the living room, needing space to calm down. Eventually, guilt overtook fear. I couldn't leave my younger sister alone in the room, so I reluctantly returned to bed, convincing myself it had to be my imagination. For weeks afterward, I tested myself. I'd turn off the lights, stare at the desk, hoping to find some logical explanation, maybe just a weird stack of books or papers casting odd shadows. But every night, no matter how I positioned things, the desk remained just an ordinary desk. So that's my second encounter with the pale man. He stood there, silent and watchful, and I still have no explanation for who or what he was. What do you think he wanted? Have you ever experienced something similar? Hey everyone! I put a lot of effort and heart into creating these videos just for you. If you're enjoying the content, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a quick comment below and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Your support means the world to me, and it keeps me motivated to bring more awesome videos your way. 10 years ago, when I was 19, I met a girl named Emily at a local coffee shop. We clicked instantly and quickly became close friends. At the time, Emily was sharing a small apartment downtown with another girl, but the arrangement soon soured. Frustrated, she moved in with me and my family temporarily, but after a few weeks, we knew it was time to find our own place. It wasn't long before we discovered a cozy, affordable basement apartment on the outskirts of Silver Springs. Emily had always been curious about the supernatural. Nothing extreme, just tarot cards, sage burning, and crystals scattered on shelves. It never bothered me. We were young, figuring out life, and it seemed harmless enough. About a month after settling in, our landlord, Maggie, stopped by to pick up her mail. As we stood in the kitchen, making small talk, Maggie casually mentioned that she believed the house was haunted. She joked that her grandmother, who had passed away in the home years earlier, might still linger, alongside a few other restless spirits. I didn't take it seriously. I had never believed in ghosts and had no reason to start now. But soon, things began to change. One night, a few weeks later, I was sound asleep when Emily entered my room without knocking. Her voice startled me awake as she stood by my bed. "You need to be careful," she whispered, her eyes distant and serious. "They don't like you. They're watching you." Before I could respond, she turned abruptly and left, leaving me wide awake, heart racing. I told myself it was probably just a vivid dream, but the unease lingered. Unable to shake it off, I got out of bed and went to her room, finding Emily fast asleep under her blankets, completely unaware of what had just happened. When I confronted her the next morning, she looked confused, genuinely unable to recall saying anything at all. I tried brushing it off as a bizarre dream, but something didn't sit right. Then about 3 weeks later, things took an even stranger turn. It was a chilly November evening, and we were watching TV when I decided to head to bed early. I had a shift at the diner at 5 a.m. Sleep came easily, but around 2 a.m., something jolted me awake. It wasn't a noise or a touch, but an overwhelming sensation that I wasn't alone. My chest tightened, and the air felt heavy, oppressive. I sat up slowly, scanning the darkened room, my heart hammering. It felt like something was watching me from the shadows. Unnerved, I got up and moved to the bathroom, hoping to shake the feeling. But the sensation persisted. No matter where I went, it felt as if unseen eyes followed. Desperate for comfort, I wandered into the living room, turned on the TV, and tried distracting myself. That's when the temperature dropped sharply. A chill brushed against my cheek, whisper thin, like an icy breath. It was winter, sure, but every window and door was sealed tight against the cold. There was no logical reason for the sudden chill, and that's when I heard it. A faint, indistinct whispering. At first, it sounded like murmurs carried by the wind, but it quickly grew louder, surrounding me, circling closer. Though I couldn't make out any words, the whispering felt deliberate, menacing, like dozens of hidden voices conspiring around me. My chest tightened in panic. It was no hallucination. I could hear them clearly, taunting me, swirling around the room, growing louder. My body froze in terror. Questions raced through my mind. Was this real? Was I losing my mind? In desperation, I did something I rarely ever did. I began to pray. My voice shook as I whispered, "Please, God, make it stop. I'm terrified. Please, make it stop." Instantly, everything ceased. The whispering vanished, the room warmed, and the heavy, oppressive feeling lifted. Silence filled the space again, comforting and familiar. Relief flooded me, overwhelming and profound. It was as if whatever presence had been there vanished entirely. I don't remember how long I stood trembling in that living room, but eventually, exhaustion overtook fear, and I cautiously returned to bed. Sleep came quickly, as if nothing strange had occurred. But when my alarm went off at 5 a.m., the memory rushed back, chilling me to my bones. That morning, I hurried through my routine, desperate to escape the apartment. After that night, I couldn't bear sleeping there again. I stayed at my boyfriend's place or crashed on friends' couches, anywhere but that apartment. Eventually, I moved back in with my parents. I never explained what truly happened, but they could sense something had changed. To this day, I can't fully explain that night. The whispers, the biting chill, the overwhelming fear. It all felt too real to dismiss as imagination. Sometimes, in quiet moments, I still wonder if something was truly there, waiting in the darkness. And occasionally, when I'm alone at night, I swear I can still hear those whispers, faintly circling around me, just out of reach. Have you ever experienced something you couldn't explain? I've been meaning to share something strange that's been happening to me lately. It started a few months ago, and each time it happens, it's both unsettling and, in some weird way, fascinating. I remember one night, just hanging out in my room. It was late, and the place was dark except for the dim glow of the streetlights outside. I couldn't really explain it, but there were these shadowy figures moving in an odd pattern. They'd move, stop, then move again, like they were stuck in some kind of strange loop. It gave me the creeps, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I didn't stick around for long. My heart was pounding, and I bolted out of the room. The whole thing felt wrong, like I wasn't meant to see it. A couple of weeks later, it happened again. This time, I was lying in bed, trying to fall asleep. I felt that same unease creeping in, that gut feeling that something wasn't right. When I opened my eyes, there they were, dark figures, moving around my room. At first, I just froze, staring at them in disbelief. I thought I was imagining it, but when I blinked and looked again, they were still there, moving in and out of my vision, right in front of me. I won't lie, it freaked me out. But then, I started to talk myself down. I'm a rational person, right? I told myself, you're just imagining things. Relax. And after a few minutes, I actually started to calm down. I didn't want to be scared, so I just lay there, trying to make sense of it all. Curious, I extended my hand to see what would happen, and to my surprise, the figures interacted with me. They were like these dark wisps, almost like smoke, but solid, almost like shadows, but with a strange, almost tangible presence. When my hand reached out, the mist would swirl around it. It wasn't cold, but it wasn't warm either, just this odd, uncomfortable chill. When I tried to cup my hands around it, the mist would slip through my fingers, like it wasn't solid enough to hold. The figures themselves were unnerving. They were humanoid, but they had no faces, no distinguishing features, just these dark shapes, like something straight out of a nightmare. They crawled on my bed, moved in unnatural ways, crouching and shifting like they were following some unseen rhythm. They didn't speak, didn't make a sound, but there was this strange energy to them, like they were stuck in some loop, caught in their own bizarre motions. Eventually, I must have fallen asleep. Funny how exhaustion can make you numb to things. I guess I just got used to it, or maybe I convinced myself that I was just dreaming. The last time this happened was just last week when I was staying at my boyfriend's place. We had just gotten into bed, and as soon as I settled in, I saw them again, figures, moving around the room. At first, I thought I was imagining it, but there were more this time. One of them was right on his chest, and two more were near me, sort of crouched above my head on the bed. It was like they were interacting with each other, moving in their weird, methodical ways. One of them caught my eye, a girl. She crouched down in front of me, almost like she was staring at me. I could see her eyes, her nose, faint details like that, but everything else was just dark, like she was made of shadow. She would turn away, go back to whatever she was doing, interacting with the others, and then come back to me. It felt strange, like she knew I was watching, almost like she was acknowledging me in some way. I didn't feel the fear I once did, but it still felt unsettling. I didn't know what to make of it. I wasn't scared, not exactly, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. After about 15 minutes, I was tired. so I rolled over onto my stomach, trying to ignore the figures and get some sleep. The next morning, when I woke up, it was like nothing had happened. It felt like a dream, but I knew it wasn't. The figures had been too real. The sensation had been too real. I'm not sure what to make of all this. The weird thing is, I'm not scared of them anymore. It still unnerves me, but it's like this strange curiosity takes over. I've noticed something though. When I try to interact with them, they move in these repetitive patterns. If I extend my hand, they mirror me, moving their own hands, retracting and extending again, over and over, in a way that almost feels rehearsed. And the strangest part, whenever they realize I can see them, they start tapping my face, around my eyes. It doesn't hurt, but I can feel the pressure. It's like they're trying to get my attention or maybe just check if I'm still aware of them. What do you think? Have you ever experienced something like this? I still don't know what's going on, but part of me wonders if I'm just caught in some kind of weird, invisible game with them. I live in a quiet suburb in Pennsylvania, and over the years, I've had more than my share of eerie encounters, some strange, some genuinely unsettling. But there's one I'll never forget. It happened at Hershey Park, a famous amusement park known for chocolate-themed rides, on a hot July afternoon. It was our annual summer camp trip, and everyone in my group was thrilled about riding Storm Runner, a roller coaster famous for its intense speed and sudden drops. I've always been a bit hesitant about thrill rides, but peer pressure can be powerful, so I decided to at least line up with my friends. As we got closer, though, I felt my nerves take over and backed out at the last second. My friend Emily and 4 others got on, but our counselor, Sarah, stayed behind with me. I stood near the exit gate, watching my friends get settled into their seats when something odd caught my attention. Emily asked if she could switch seats with another friend because she saw an empty spot next to him. He agreed, but as she went to sit down, she suddenly stopped, looking confused. It was as if something, or someone, was blocking her way. She shrugged it off with a laugh and said she'd wait for the next round. That's when the weirdness really began. As I watched closely, the safety harness of the empty seat moved down on its own, clicking securely into place. No one was sitting there, yet the bar was locked tight. My breath caught, and I wondered if my eyes were playing tricks on me. I didn't say anything at first, thinking maybe the heat had gotten to me. But when the ride attendant checked everyone's harnesses, he paused briefly at that seat, visibly puzzled, before moving on without saying a word. Moments later, the ride launched upward with incredible speed, the screams of excitement echoing across the park. My friends returned exhilarated, talking about how amazing the ride was. We lingered nearby, waiting for another group to ride when I noticed something even stranger. The same empty seat remained locked, harness still securely in place. It looked bizarrely out of place among the now empty seats. Curiosity compelled me to take out my phone and snap a quick photo, just to see if anything unusual appeared. My heart nearly stopped as I glanced at the screen. Clearly visible, sitting calmly in the previously empty seat, was a teenage boy around 17, dressed in an old-fashioned Hershey Park uniform. He had his arms crossed, a bored and mildly irritated expression on his face. Frozen in shock, I stared at the boy, who seemed completely out of place. Before I could react, he stood up, walked right past me, and approached the ride's control booth. Suddenly, the attendants announced that the ride was experiencing technical difficulties, claiming the system was registering unsecured seats, even though everything appeared fine. Later, when the ride was running smoothly again, I couldn't shake the feeling that this mysterious figure had something to do with the malfunction. But I wasn't prepared for what happened next. Our second round at Storm Runner, I saw him again. This time, I wasn't afraid. I'd encountered spirits before, so my curiosity outweighed my fear. Standing alone while Sarah went to grab snacks, I spotted him again, this time perched casually atop the loading platform roof. I called out hesitantly, surprised when he quickly climbed down and stood beside me. Nervously clutching my phone, I asked who he was. Calmly, he introduced himself as Alex, explaining he used to work at the park 3 years ago. On a trial run of Storm Runner, He bravely volunteered when everyone else hesitated. But at the highest peak, the coaster malfunctioned, suddenly rolling backward at terrifying speeds. Alex tragically didn't survive. He explained he'd stayed behind, determined to protect others from his fate. The earlier interference, he admitted sheepishly, was because Emily's screaming irritated him. After a gentle laugh, I told him she screamed at everything. He smiled faintly, seemingly letting it go. Alex said his farewell and vanished toward the ride. I never saw him again, but sometimes when visiting Hershey Park, I glance toward Storm Runner, wondering if Alex is still there, quietly ensuring everyone's safety. And if you ever visit, you might spot the small, reassuring sign near the entrance. Occasionally, Storm Runner may momentarily stop at its peak. This is completely normal, and if it happens, the ride will safely return to the starting point, ready for another thrilling launch. I live in a quiet suburb in Pennsylvania, and over the years, I've had more than my share of eerie encounters, some strange, some genuinely unsettling. But there's one I'll never forget. It happened at Hershey Park, a famous amusement park known for chocolate-themed rides, on a hot July afternoon. It was our annual summer camp trip, and everyone in my group was thrilled about riding Storm Runner, a roller coaster famous for its intense speed and sudden drops. I've always been a bit hesitant about thrill rides, but peer pressure can be powerful, so I decided to at least line up with my friends. As we got closer, though, I felt my nerves take over and backed out at the last second. My friend Emily and 4 others got on, but our counselor, Sarah, stayed behind with me. I stood near the exit gate, watching my friends get settled into their seats when something odd caught my attention. Emily asked if she could switch seats with another friend because she saw an empty spot next to him. He agreed, but as she went to sit down, she suddenly stopped, looking confused. It was as if something, or someone, was blocking her way. She shrugged it off with a laugh and said she'd wait for the next round. That's when the weirdness really began. As I watched closely, the safety harness of the empty seat moved down on its own, clicking securely into place. No one was sitting there, yet the bar was locked tight. My breath caught, and I wondered if my eyes were playing tricks on me. I didn't say anything at first, thinking maybe the heat had gotten to me. But when the ride attendant checked everyone's harnesses, he paused briefly at that seat, visibly puzzled, before moving on without saying a word. Moments later, the ride launched upward with incredible speed, the screams of excitement echoing across the park. My friends returned exhilarated, talking about how amazing the ride was. We lingered nearby, waiting for another group to ride when I noticed something even stranger. The same empty seat remained locked, harness still securely in place. It looked bizarrely out of place among the now empty seats. Curiosity compelled me to take out my phone and snap a quick photo, just to see if anything unusual appeared. My heart nearly stopped as I glanced at the screen. Clearly visible, sitting calmly in the previously empty seat, was a teenage boy around 17, dressed in an old-fashioned Hershey Park uniform. He had his arms crossed, a bored and mildly irritated expression on his face. Frozen in shock, I stared at the boy, who seemed completely out of place. Before I could react, he stood up, walked right past me, and approached the ride's control booth. Suddenly, the attendants announced that the ride was experiencing technical difficulties, claiming the system was registering unsecured seats, even though everything appeared fine. Later, when the ride was running smoothly again, I couldn't shake the feeling that this mysterious figure had something to do with the malfunction. But I wasn't prepared for what happened next. Our second round at Storm Runner, I saw him again. This time, I wasn't afraid. I'd encountered spirits before, so my curiosity outweighed my fear. Standing alone while Sarah went to grab snacks, I spotted him again, this time perched casually atop the loading platform roof. I called out hesitantly, surprised when he quickly climbed down and stood beside me. Nervously clutching my phone, I asked who he was. Calmly, he introduced himself as Alex, explaining he used to work at the park 3 years ago. On a trial run of Storm Runner, he bravely volunteered when everyone else hesitated. But at the highest peak, the coaster malfunctioned, suddenly rolling backward at terrifying speeds. Alex tragically didn't survive. He explained he'd stayed behind, determined to protect others from his fate. The earlier interference, he admitted sheepishly, was because Emily's screaming irritated him. After a gentle laugh, I told him she screamed at everything. He smiled faintly, seemingly letting it go. Alex said his farewell and vanished toward the ride. I never saw him again, but sometimes when visiting Hershey Park, I glance toward Storm Runner, wondering if Alex is still there, quietly ensuring everyone's safety. And if you ever visit, you might spot the small, reassuring sign near the entrance. Occasionally, Storm Runner may momentarily stop at its peak. This is completely normal, and if it happens, the ride will safely return to the starting point, ready for another thrilling launch. When I was around 14, my parents decided to go out for dinner one chilly autumn evening, leaving me home alone in our old farmhouse on the outskirts of Pine Lake. It was my job to look after our two little terriers, Max and Ruby, both surprisingly mellow for their energetic breed. I was on the phone chatting casually with my friend Emily, when suddenly a loud crash echoed from upstairs, like glass shattering on a hardwood floor. Immediately, my heart raced. My mom suffered from arthritis, and I worried she might have fallen. "Mom," I shouted, bounding up the creaky wooden staircase. But as I reached the upstairs landing, nothing appeared disturbed. Not a single thing was out of place. Even Emily heard the noise through the phone and asked nervously, "What was that?" I didn't have an answer. A few hours later, after my parents had left and darkness fully enveloped the old farmhouse, I settled into the living room, Max and Ruby curled up at my feet. Outside, the wind howled softly, carrying with it a sense of unease. Then, without warning, footsteps shuffled across the wooden deck just outside our French doors, instantly drawing the dog's attention. Both pups bolted upright, whining softly, their eyes fixed on the glass. A faint, heartbreaking whimper, almost like a child softly crying, drifted through the doors. I stood up slowly, my pulse quickening as dread seeped into my bones. Through the sheer curtain, illuminated by moonlight, I glimpsed a small figure sitting just beyond the door, dressed in a white garment. It looked startlingly like a toddler hunched forward, sobbing gently. Instinctively, my hand reached for the handle, but a powerful sense of foreboding held me frozen in place. My mind raced, panic rising in my throat. Shaking, I grabbed my phone and called my mom, barely able to speak clearly through my fear. "There's someone here," I whispered urgently. My mom tried reassuring me it was probably nothing, but I insisted, describing the dog's strange behavior. Concerned, my parents promised they'd head back immediately. Moments later, every light in the farmhouse burst on simultaneously, flooding the rooms with an unsettling brightness. I sprinted to the front door as my parents' car pulled into the driveway. Tears streamed down my face as I threw myself into my mom's comforting embrace, relief washing over me. I didn't experience anything else quite like that night again, until years later. Shortly before my mom passed away when I was 18, she revealed that she too had felt something strange in our home. She admitted the dryer door in our laundry room, brand new with a sturdy latch, would mysteriously swing open mid-cycle. I always thought she was teasing me when she'd shout from the basement, annoyed at the open dryer. After she passed, I started noticing her presence in subtle ways, almost like an echo of her daily routine. Every morning precisely at 6:30 a.m., I'd awaken to the familiar shuffle of her slippers crossing the kitchen floor, the gentle creak of cupboard doors opening as she prepared her morning tea. At first, I convinced myself it was just grief-induced imagination, but two separate friends staying over mentioned hearing the exact same sounds. Oddly enough, these encounters didn't frighten me. Instead, I found comfort in softly whispering, "It's okay, it's just Mom," before drifting back into peaceful sleep. I've always wondered why these things happened. Perhaps our farmhouse had absorbed the emotional energy of our lives, particularly during those final emotionally charged weeks before Mom's passing. Maybe her spirit lingered because of love or routine, or some unfinished purpose she had yet to fulfill. Her presence remained, quietly comforting, a gentle reminder that love outlives even death. It happened to my sister, Emily, and her husband, Michael, and unfortunately, it's still going on. I'm genuinely worried about both of them. Michael has always had this strange gift. He can see and communicate with spirits. This ability draws unwanted attention, and lately, they've encountered something more intense than ever before. On the night of October 15th, 2019, Emily woke up suddenly after Michael accidentally elbowed her in his sleep. She glanced over to see him peacefully resting, oblivious. Then she heard knocking at their front door, quickly followed by their dog, Bella, barking frantically. Oddly, Michael didn't stir at all. Emily managed to calm Bella and tried to return to sleep, but she felt a heavy, oppressive presence surrounding her. Instinctively, she reached over and lit her bedside candle, hoping its familiar glow would reassure her. But this time, the calming warmth never came. Feeling increasingly anxious, Emily carefully climbed over Michael and lit another candle across the room. He still didn't awaken, which was unusual for him. As she lay back down, a loud thumping echoed from the living room, causing Bella to erupt into another barking frenzy. Panic set in as Emily shook Michael awake, urgently whispering that someone was in their house. They cautiously opened the bedroom door, and Bella immediately bolted out, snarling deeply with the most aggressive stance Emily had ever seen. The dog frantically searched every corner, sensing something unseen yet undeniably present. When they retreated to their bedroom, the unsettling sensation only intensified. Michael suddenly froze, staring into the darkness. He described two figures bathed in soft white light standing protectively before him, shielding him from what he could only describe as a dark, crimson fog swirling ominously nearby. Together, Emily and Michael lit additional candles and quietly began reciting prayers, pleading for protection. Eventually, the eerie presence faded away, allowing them to drift into an uneasy sleep, still deeply shaken. This encounter wasn't isolated. Michael experiences these chilling episodes almost nightly, prompting them to seek advice from a trusted psychic they've consulted before. The psychic, aware of Michael's unique abilities, revealed unsettling news. A malevolent spirit had attached itself to Michael's right arm. This entity, according to the psychic, was connected to Michael through a past life, a soldier from a forgotten conflict who was tasked with protecting a small town, but instead committed a horrifying massacre. Believing it still had unfinished business with Michael, the entity had been haunting him relentlessly. The psychic explained that their routine of lighting white candles had only aggravated the spirit further. Instead, they were instructed to burn black candles and dried white sage, firmly declaring that any previous bond was broken and demanding the spirit leave their home. Emily and Michael currently live in a small town near Pine Lake, Montana, due to Michael's military career. Last weekend, Michael visited family back in Colorado, leaving Emily home alone. She called, terrified, recounting how the spirit tormented her throughout the weekend, doors slamming, footsteps pacing, and whispers echoing through empty rooms. On Sunday morning, she discovered a painful scratch down her back. The psychic warned that even after successfully removing the spirit, Michael must close the gateway within himself to permanently sever the entity's hold. I'm deeply concerned that this malevolent presence might cause them harm beyond anything they've already experienced. What do you think might happen next? Have you ever faced something similar? I remember playing Bloody Mary at a sleepover hosted by my elementary school. It was our end-of-year celebration for 5th graders in Pine Lake, a quiet little town in Ohio. The teachers called it a lock-in, essentially a massive supervised slumber party held in our school's gymnasium. Now, I'm not entirely convinced that it was Bloody Mary herself, but something definitely happened that night. Something dark enough that it terrified my friend so deeply, her parents withdrew her from school altogether. My two closest friends, Emily and Jasmine, and I were sitting in our sleeping bags, restless and bored. It was around 11:30, and nearly 50 of us were sprawled across the gym floor, whispering quietly and sharing spooky stories beneath the dim glow of safety lights. That's when Jasmine started telling us about Bloody Mary. about how if you stood in front of a bathroom mirror in total darkness, turned on the faucet full blast, and said her name 3 times, she would appear. Jasmine added a chilling twist. If you could withstand seeing her without looking away, she'd grant you a wish. Intrigued yet terrified, Emily and I agreed to give it a try. A teacher, Mr. Thompson, escorted us down the long, dimly lit hallway toward the girls' restroom. He stayed outside as we went in. As soon as the bathroom door closed, Emily and I immediately chickened out. We nervously laughed, retreating into the safety of the bathroom stalls, leaving Jasmine standing defiantly in front of the mirror and sinks. I figured she would back down too, but as I sat in the stall, heart pounding, the lights suddenly flickered and went out completely, plunging us into darkness. Instantly, the faucets roared to life, water rushing with impossible intensity. I gasped, hearing Emily shout from her stall, "Jasmine, stop." We burst from our stalls at the exact same moment. Through the dim illumination provided by street lamps outside the bathroom windows, I saw Jasmine staring into the mirror, whispering the name for the 3rd and final time. What unfolded next haunted me for years. Through the faint light, I saw the water pouring from the faucets, but something was terribly wrong. The water wasn't clear. It looked dark, thick, almost oily. Fighting against my instincts, I moved closer and placed my trembling hand under the stream. It was warm, almost hot, and my stomach twisted when I realized it was pitch black. Turning sharply toward Emily, I saw her frozen in place, eyes wide with terror, fixed on Jasmine. My gaze shifted toward Jasmine, whose face was frozen in an expression of silent terror, her mouth forming a perfect, petrified O. Suddenly, without warning, the mirror in front of Jasmine cracked violently and shattered, shards of glass spilling onto the tiled floor. I was paralyzed, unable to comprehend how Jasmine had instantly gotten hold of one sharp piece of the broken mirror. Without hesitation, she began dragging the jagged edge across her wrist. From her wound flowed the same black substance pouring from the faucets. Black blood. My pulse hammered painfully in my chest. My voice caught in my throat. Terror kept me rooted to the spot. Emily broke the trance first, her scream piercing the silence. Immediately, Mr. Thompson burst through the bathroom door, flicking on the lights. The instant brightness washed over us. The bathroom reverted to a chilling normality, the mirror intact, the faucets silent and dry. But Jasmine's wrist was still bleeding, and dark stains smeared my fingertips. Shaking, I rushed to the sink, washing away the residue before anyone noticed. Mr. Thompson hurried over, wrapping Jasmine's wrist in a towel. She shakily explained she'd slipped in the darkness. Emily stayed silent, eyes downcast, and I numbly echoed Jasmine's explanation. But our shared glances revealed an unspoken understanding. We knew the truth. Soon Jasmine's parents arrived, taking her home without another word. Emily avoided me the rest of the night, and sleep eluded me entirely. Images of dark blood and shattered mirrors replaying endlessly behind my closed eyelids. The next day, Emily left early and never returned to Pine Lake Elementary. Weeks passed, and eventually, a teacher gently explained that Emily had switched to homeschooling. Months later, I encountered Emily's parents at a grocery store. When I approached to say hello, they coldly ignored me, quickly disappearing down another aisle without a single acknowledgement. Jasmine never spoke of that night again. As time passed, our friendship dissolved into awkward nods in hallways. Once during middle school, I finally gathered the courage to ask her about it. Her eyes flashed with anger as she snapped at me, claiming I was crazy and threatening to make trouble if I ever mentioned it again. I'll never fully understand what Jasmine saw in that mirror or explain what truly happened. To anyone else, the evidence seemed non-existent. Mirrors intact, sinks dry, but deep in my bones, I knew it was real. Whether it was Bloody Mary herself or some other dark force preying on the fears of 3 innocent girls, that night changed us. I share this story not to scare you, but to offer a gentle, lingering reminder. Some truths hide beneath the surface, waiting silently for someone to call them forth. Have you ever wondered what waits behind your reflection? It was a quiet Friday evening in Silver Springs, the kind of night where everything feels unnervingly still. The house was unusually silent for a Friday night, with only the soft hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen and the occasional creak of the floorboards echoing in the silence. I was alone, just me, the low tick of the clock on the wall, and the kind of silence that made each second feel like an eternity. I've always enjoyed a bit of peace after a hectic week, but that night was different. There was something in the air, a strange tension I couldn't quite put my finger on. Maybe it was the stories I had heard about the house growing up, or maybe it was just the feeling that I was being watched. Whatever it was, I couldn't shake the unease that settled in my chest. It wasn't until later, when I was preparing to go to bed, that I first heard it. The sound came from upstairs, a soft, almost imperceptible noise, like someone was walking around in the room just above mine. My first instinct was to brush it off. It could have been the house settling, or maybe just the wind outside making the house creak. But as I stood there listening, I realized it wasn't just that. The footsteps, if they could even be called that, weren't the normal sounds of a house settling. These were deliberate, slow, like someone pacing back and forth, as if they were waiting for something. And then, suddenly, the noise stopped. The silence that followed was so deep, I could hear my own breath echoing in the room. It was the kind of silence you get just before something happens. I tried to convince myself I was imagining things, that there had to be a logical explanation. But as I turned to walk back to my room, the lights flickered, a faint shimmer in the bulbs, followed by a low hum from the lamp beside my bed. It wasn't much, but the sensation that something wasn't right hit me like a cold gust of wind. The hours that followed were a blur. I tried to ignore the unsettling feeling in my stomach, but it wouldn't go away. No matter what I did, I couldn't shake the nagging sense of being watched. The noises didn't stop either. Soft knocks on my door, faint whispers like voices on the wind, distant but constant. As I lay in bed, my pulse quickened, but I couldn't figure out what to do. I tried to call out, but the words caught in my throat. Was it just my imagination, or was something else at work? I couldn't tell. The whispers, the knocks, they kept coming, and they were getting closer. At some point, I must have fallen asleep. When I woke, I was lying flat on my back, staring up at the ceiling, my heart pounding. My room was dark still, but I wasn't alone. There was someone, sitting at the foot of my bed. I saw it out of the corner of my eye, a shadow just beyond the edge of the dim light filtering through the window. I held my breath, frozen in place. The feeling in my chest was the same as that horrible sensation when you realize you're trapped in a nightmare you can't escape. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. Then, just as quickly as it appeared, the shadow was gone. It vanished, and the room fell into a heavy silence, one that felt wrong. It was like something was pressing in on me, but I couldn't figure out what. I couldn't stay in that room, not with the memory of that shadow lingering in my mind. I walked down the hallway, my footsteps barely making a sound on the old wooden floor. The house felt even quieter now, almost suffocating. It was as if the entire place was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. That night was the first time I truly felt like I wasn't alone in this house. But it wouldn't be the last. The noises, the shadows, they've come back since then, always at night when the house is still. I still hear the whispers sometimes, soft knocks that seem to come from nowhere. And every time, I feel it, the presence, just out of sight, lurking in the dark. I can't explain it. I don't know what's here or why it's here, but something's waiting, something that won't leave. It happened at an old farmhouse just outside Silver Springs, nestled deep in the wooded hills of Oregon. The house, well over a century old, had been home to generations of the Caldwell family, whose tragic past had woven itself into local folklore over the decades. It was the kind of place where history lingered in the wooden beams and whispered through the cold drafts of its halls. I'd visited the farmhouse a few times before. Usually, it was a charming spot for weekend getaways with friends, a quiet retreat from modern life. But this visit felt different. Maybe it was because autumn had settled in fully, with a chilling wind sweeping through the pines, or perhaps because Halloween was just a few days away. Anyone who's ever stayed out in the countryside knows how incredibly dark and silent it becomes at night, especially far away from town lights. It was the perfect atmosphere for our favorite game, hide and seek in the dark. Trust me, it's more thrilling than it sounds. This round, it was my turn to seek. I decided to start with the master bedroom upstairs. Downstairs, a fire gently crackled in the fireplace, its orange glow softly illuminating the hallway, but barely reaching into the darkness of the room ahead. As I stepped inside, my vision blurred slightly, adjusting to the shadows. Then, something stopped me cold. Right in front of me, a shape appeared out of nowhere. It didn't have clear edges or a solid outline. It seemed to shift, as though made of smoke or shadows, but roughly matched my own height and build. What made it so unsettling was how utterly black it was, darker than anything around it. It stood out sharply against the dim glow from downstairs. I could still see the old furniture around it, but this figure absorbed every ounce of light. As I stared, frozen in place, something else happened. In the center of this shadow, where you'd expect a face, a tiny point of crimson light emerged. It began to glow brighter, slowly expanding. It looked like an eye, burning and intensely aware. Oddly enough, I wasn't frightened right away, more confused and curious about what I was witnessing. Still, my instincts told me not to linger. I took a slow step back, then quickly turned and left the room. Glancing over my shoulder, I watched the red glow fade away, and the shadow dissolved into nothingness. The game went on, and eventually, I found almost everyone. Only one friend, Jake, remained hidden. Returning to the master bedroom, I hesitated at the doorway, but this time everything seemed normal. No dark shape, no red eye. After a quick scan, I finally spotted Jake perched impossibly high atop the old wardrobe. I asked if he'd been there the whole time, and he swore he hadn't moved an inch. But looking at the wardrobe, it made no sense. No one could have climbed up there without making a sound. The old floorboards creaked loudly with every step, and I definitely would have heard him. To this day, I'm not entirely sure what I encountered in that farmhouse. Honestly, I'm not sure I even want to know. The memory still lingers, a subtle whisper in the back of my mind, especially late at night when the shadows start to dance. Have you ever experienced anything similar? What do you think was in that room? When I was around 3 years old, I was an only child, and I didn't mind being alone. My room was small, tucked into the corner of our cozy house in Silver Springs, so I'd usually play out in the hallway near the stairs. My mom would often catch me talking to what looked like no one. At first, she figured I was just using my imagination like most kids do. But it wasn't just babble. Even at that young age, I was holding conversations, answering questions, pausing like I was listening. And some of the things I said, they weren't the kind of things a toddler should understand. As I learned to speak more clearly, I started telling her, "I'm going to talk to the lady on the stairs now." I'd walk up to the landing, stand near the wall, and talk to it like someone was there. That's what I called her, the lady on the landing. To me, she felt like a teacher, someone older. She wasn't unkind, but she had a certain strictness about her. I remember feeling both comforted and unsettled. Eventually, I stopped mentioning her. The conversations faded. For a while, it all seemed to go away. But around the age of 6, something changed. I started to dread going down the stairs. I couldn't do it without pressing my back to the wall. I always felt like something, or someone, was behind me, watching. That same tension crept into the bathroom too, which was just off the stairs. Any time I was in there alone, it felt like eyes were burning into me from the hallway. We had a light out there that never worked, no matter how many bulbs we replaced. Even an electrician couldn't figure out what the issue was. Then, when I was 8, things got worse. My grandpa had been diagnosed with lung cancer and was in the hospital. Around the same time, my dad caught a bad case of salmonella and was too sick to leave his bed. My mom had me sleep with her in the master bedroom while Dad stayed in mine. The first night I slept in that bed, I woke up exactly 3:32 a.m. The air was freezing, far colder than it should have been for early fall in Oregon. I pulled the blanket up and froze as I heard it. Heavy breathing coming from just beyond the door. Deep, strained, unearthly. I tried to tell myself it was Dad, but something about the sound felt wrong. Then I saw it. A tall, dark figure appeared in the doorway. At first, I thought it was just the robe hanging from the hook, but it hovered slightly above the floor, swaying, shifting. I dove under the covers, trying not to wake Mom, but I felt it move. It crossed the room in silence, walked around the bed, and then I felt it sit, right at my feet. I was paralyzed. It was like it was pressing down on my legs. And then it stood. I could feel it right beside my head, not touching me, just looming. Finally, I thrashed and kicked, landing it hard hit to my mom's back. She woke up with a gasp, rolled over, and whispered, "Is someone in the room?" My heart was pounding so hard the mattress trembled beneath us. We didn't dare get up. We just watched the doorway, and for the briefest moment, I saw its eyes. They glowed orange. No pupils, no features, just burning. It was taller than the doorframe, and it didn't have a body, really, just a shadow, a presence. Every Monday morning for the next several weeks, the same thing happened. Same time, same dark feeling. Once it came into my own room. I hid under the blanket, heart racing, too scared to even breathe. That house, it wasn't just me. Everyone had stories. Relatives heard crying upstairs, only to find no one there. Friends heard footsteps on the landing. One night, while my dad drove me to my grandma's, Mom was putting on makeup in the bathroom and swore she heard someone pacing outside the door. She locked herself in, convinced a burglar had broken in. But when Dad came home, the house was empty. Another time, I was on my bed playing with a toy when the bathroom light flicked on. The cord was swinging, hitting the wall. Then came the shuffling. Slow, dragging steps on the tile floor. I screamed. Mom came running with the fireplace poker, pale as a ghost. She'd heard it too. We didn't last much longer in that house. My mom and I couldn't take it anymore, and we moved out. The moment we left, that heavy feeling lifted. For the first time in years, I wasn't looking over my shoulder. Nothing quite like that ever happened again. Until recently. Now I'm a college student, living off campus with a few roommates. I've fallen into that typical late-night routine, up at 2 or 3 a.m., grabbing water from the kitchen while the world sleeps. And that's when I started noticing the TV. I never go into the living room at night, but a few times I've passed by and seen the screen glowing black. Not playing anything, just on. But when I step into the doorway, it turns off. No sound, no click, no hum, just off. No one else has seen it happen. The lights are strange too. Only when I'm alone, the few strips. I'll flip on the hallway or kitchen light, and suddenly, everything goes dark. But it never happens when anyone else is home. The most terrifying moment, though, happened just a few nights ago. I was sitting on the front steps, smoking, staring out at the empty street. It was quiet, still, but then something shifted. A wave of dread hit me, so heavy I could barely breathe. My chest tightened, my thoughts spiraled, and my stomach turned. Horrible images flashed in my mind, but they were too fast, too dark to understand. I doubled over and threw up in the bushes, and then it stopped. The air cleared, my chest relaxed, but I couldn't remember what I'd seen, only that it had felt evil. I thought it was over, but last night my little brother came into my room. He handed me a stack of strange cards he'd found tucked under my bed. And that's where things really started to unravel. Before I begin, I know this might sound like something out of a horror flick, but I promise, everything I'm about to share actually happened. There's this guy I know, Jake. He's always doing card tricks. Pretty harmless stuff. But one afternoon, sitting on the porch of his granddad's old cabin in Silver Springs, he pulled out a deck I'd never seen before. The cards were worn and strange, with symbols that didn't look quite right. He handed me the deck and said, "Pick one, then say top or bottom." I chose top. He flipped the card and read aloud in a serious tone, "You're in danger, excess, and solitude." That line stuck with me, still does. I've had experiences with the paranormal for as long as I can remember, literally since I was a baby. One of my earliest memories is seeing my grandfather shortly after he passed. My mom would find me standing in my crib, giggling, arms outstretched to someone only I could see. I'd say it was Grandpa. At first, she brushed it off. Kids have imaginations, right? But one day, she found me crying. Through the tears, I told her Grandpa had come into the room with two big monsters. He'd owned a pair of huge mastiffs. My mom always said he adored those dogs. I was barely a year old. No way I could have remembered that. But the worst experience. I hope I never lived through anything like it again. I was 14, about to turn 15, and going through a rough patch. Every night I'd cry myself to sleep. I felt hopeless, completely drained. That's when I started seeing it. At first, it was just a shadow. A tall, dark figure I'd catch in the corner of my eye, standing near the kitchen doorway, just outside the bathroom, at the end of the hallway, always there, but never when I turned to look directly. I kept telling myself it was my mind playing tricks on me. Depression can do that, right? But then my room started to get freezing cold. I mean, see your breath cold. In the middle of summer. It was like the warmth had been sucked right out of the air, and no matter how many times I closed the windows or checked the vents, the cold came back. I could feel it watching me. And things started moving. I'd place a notebook on my desk, and it'd be on the floor a minute later. My lamp would flicker without explanation. At night, the floorboards would creak. Not random settling, measured steps. My bed was centered in the room. I'd hear creaking on one side, a pause, then on the other, like someone, or something, was circling. Then came the whispers, soft, indistinct murmurs. I could never make out what they were saying, but they always came from just behind me. Still, none of that truly scared me. Not yet. One morning, I had to run home to grab a folder I'd forgotten for school. My mom was waiting in the car, so I rushed inside alone. As I bent to pick up the folder from beneath a shelf full of stuffed animals, I felt it. A firm grip on my shoulder, then a shove. I fell back hard and nearly hit my head on the sharp corner of the shelf. I swear I didn't trip. Something pushed me. The moment I hit the floor, all the stuffed animals fell off the shelf, landing around me like a warning. I was too shaken to tell my mom. I thought she'd just chalk it up to stress or lack of sleep. From that point on, peaceful nights were rare. The cold, the whispers, the creaking steps. A few weeks later, I was out with friends when my mom called, her voice uneasy. "There's something in your room," she said. I asked what she meant. She said she was cleaning up and happened to glance at the mirror across from my bed. In the reflection, she saw a young boy, maybe 8 years old, standing still, watching. The room had recently been redecorated. We lived in an old 1940s house, and she wondered if maybe the renovations had stirred something up. She's always been a spiritual person, so it didn't shock me when she said she marched into the room and told the spirit to leave. "If you don't," she warned aloud, "I'll have Father Matthews come bless this room." That evening, she called again, this time rattled. After telling the spirit to leave, she closed the bedroom door behind her. Moments later, it flew open on its own, then slammed shut. That scared her. After that incident, things seemed to calm down. No more whispers. No more cold air. But I still feel like something watches me when I'm back in that room. Since leaving for college in Asheville, the feeling has faded, but it never fully went away. Underscore 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 underscore. Now there's a story my mom told me, one that's always stuck with me. It happened back in 1968 in a rural stretch outside of Pine Hollow, North Carolina. She was 14, visiting her uncle and aunt's cottage with her younger sister, Chloe, who was 5 at the time. The cottage sat on the edge of a dense pine forest. It had been in the family for generations, passed down, lived in, and loved. But there was always something off about it. The house was simple, an old Southern-style home with creaky floorboards, faded floral wallpaper, and musty rooms that smelled of damp wood and dust. The living room and kitchen shared a space they called the parlor, with 2 bedrooms on opposite ends. My mom's aunt and uncle, Clara and George, occupied one room. The other was left for guests, and that's where my mom and Chloe stayed. The guest room had an old pull-out sofa bed that groaned when you sat on it. The walls were painted a lifeless off-white, and there were faded paintings of children that stared down with empty smiles. Dolls lined a high shelf, porcelain ones with glassy eyes that never blinked. Worst of all were the pillows. They were stuffed with crinkly newspaper, so every time you moved, they rustled like dry leaves. To my mom and Chloe, it was funny at first. They laughed, whispered stories to each other, and tried to keep quiet so their aunt wouldn't scold them for being up past bedtime. It was around 9:30 or 10 p.m. when it happened. The bedroom door creaked open slowly. They froze, eyes shut tight, pretending to sleep. Then came the footsteps, heavy, deliberate, boots, not slippers. Each step echoed on the old wooden floor, growing louder as they approached the bed. Then, silence. The sound stopped right beside where my mom lay. It was late, and Maura felt an unsettling sensation, as if someone were watching her. Then, she heard the subtle rustling of the pillow beside her. She could feel the pillow dip, as though someone had leaned over her, their breath hot against her ear. Colette was on the other side of the bed, pressed against the wall. The pressure on the pillow lasted for what seemed like an eternity before it abruptly lifted. The footsteps began to fade, retreating away from the bed and toward the door. The door creaked as it shut, and the house fell silent once again. At first, Maura didn't think much of it. Maybe her aunt had just been checking on them in the night. The next morning, she asked Maggie if she had come into their room. Maggie gave her a sharp look and said, "We were asleep all night, Maura. Tim and I didn't get up at all." Tim confirmed it as well. So what could it have been? Was it Maggie playing a prank? That didn't seem likely. Maggie wasn't the type to joke around. Could she have gone into the room unknowingly? It was possible, but Maura's mind wandered to darker thoughts. Maybe it was something else, something older, tied to the history of the land. Perhaps the spirits that haunted the old Lissadell estate had returned to wonder why strange children were now sleeping under its roof. Fast forward to 2006, when I found myself back at that same estate. It had been renovated, extensions had been added, and the old rooms were modernized. The once creepy room where Maura had felt that presence had been redecorated. Now it was home to Andrea, Maggie, and Tim's daughter and her family. Andrea didn't know about the strange history of the room, and soon she started to notice the odd occurrences. The room would be cold, unexplainably cold, like a frosty winter morning, even in the middle of a hot August. That familiar musty smell, like a place that hadn't been lived in for years, still lingered despite all the renovations. I felt it too. It was the same feeling I had experienced years ago. But Andrea had never been told about the room's history. Perhaps that was for the best. I grew up in a small, quiet suburb just outside of Chicago, a place where the wind blew through the trees at night and the roads seemed empty, even on a Friday evening. My parents, my older brother, and sister, we all lived in a modest 2-story house with a small yard, surrounded by friendly neighbors. When I was 19, I moved to a new part of the city with my daughter. I had to leave my old life behind in pursuit of a counseling degree, and we rented a small house not far from where I had grown up. It was a cozy place with a large living room, big windows that offered a perfect view of the sunrise, and a small yard perfect for my little girl. We moved in, and my daughter quickly made herself comfortable. The first night was peaceful. She went to bed while I stayed downstairs, watching TV and enjoying a takeout dinner. By the time I finished, I was ready for bed too, needing to prepare for my classes the next day. The next morning, everything seemed normal. I went through my usual routine, giving my daughter breakfast, getting her dressed, and dropping her off at my aunt's house where she worked as a registered childminder. Afterward, I returned to the house, adjusted the thermostat to a comfortable 20 degrees, and locked up before heading out to class. By the time I came home, it was around 5 p.m. I parked the car, locked it, and glanced up at the house. That's when I saw it. The curtains in my bedroom window were moving. It struck me as odd because the windows were double glazed, designed to prevent drafts. There shouldn't have been any breeze. I assumed it was the open bathroom window from earlier in the morning, so I didn't think much of it. But once I stepped inside, a wave of cold air hit me. I checked the thermostat, and it had turned itself off. That shouldn't have happened unless the system was faulty, or if I had accidentally turned it off, but neither of those were the case. After dinner, I tucked my daughter into bed, and she fell asleep quickly, just like usual. I returned downstairs to work on an essay, but about an hour later, I heard her scream. I rushed upstairs, thinking maybe she had fallen or had a bad dream. But when I opened the door, I found her standing at the foot of her bed, her arms outstretched, her eyes wide with terror. It wasn't a typical nightmare. She was shaking uncontrollably. Through her sobs, she pointed to the corner of the room. "Man," she whispered, her voice trembling. I searched the room, but all I could see was a chest of drawers and a wastebasket. There was nothing else. I asked her what she meant, but she could barely speak. Eventually, I calmed her down and brought her downstairs, letting her sleep on the sofa while I kept watch nearby. I tried to focus on my work again, but before long, I must have drifted off. When I woke up, there was a sickeningly strong smell of whiskey in the air. It was so overpowering it felt like the entire room had been drenched in it. The strange part was, I don't drink whiskey. I didn't have a drop in the house. In fact, there wasn't any alcohol anywhere. The smell made my stomach churn, but just as quickly as it appeared, it disappeared. By this point, I was more than uneasy, though I usually considered myself a skeptic. Something about this felt different, but my curiosity got the better of me. I decided to do some research. I had always been a fan of ghost hunting shows like Most Haunted, but never thought anything like that would happen to me. One method people sometimes use to detect spirits is by drawing around objects on paper and checking later to see if they've moved. I don't know why, but something about it intrigued me, so I decided to try it. I took 5 coins, placed them on a piece of paper, and carefully drew around each one. I left the paper on the kitchen table, then put my daughter to bed with me before drifting off to sleep. The next morning, my daughter didn't remember a thing from the night before, but the smell of whiskey lingered in my memory. It was so strong, like it was still in the room. Later that afternoon, we went home, and I unpacked the groceries while my daughter was happily playing in her stroller in the hallway. As I walked through the living room and into the kitchen to put some things away, I saw it. All 5 coins had shifted outside the lines I'd drawn around them. Some were farther away than others. I froze. I couldn't believe my eyes, especially since my daughter didn't even know about the coins, and there was no way she could have moved them. My heart started to race as I left the groceries, where they were, and went to grab my daughter. When I found her, she was staring up at the stairs. She didn't even acknowledge me when I called her name. I asked, "What are you looking at up there?" She slowly turned to me and said, "Man." My heart dropped. I looked up the stairs, but there was nothing. Then, without warning, I heard a loud crash, something heavy hitting the top of the stairs, then tumbling down. I grabbed my daughter, ran out of the house, and didn't stop until I reached my aunt's place. I didn't even lock the door behind me. By the time we reached her house, I was a wreck. I thought maybe I was losing my mind, or perhaps just overtired from studying. But my aunt, who always believed in the supernatural, looked at me and said that if something wasn't right, I needed to find out what it was. I couldn't believe she was saying that, but I was too shaken to argue. My aunt called my mom in Texas, got the number for an exorcist, and arranged for a visit with a family friend named Martin. When Martin arrived, I was surprised by how calm and grounded he seemed, especially for someone who dealt with the kind of work he did. He took me into the kitchen and asked me to explain everything. I told him about my daughter seeing the man, the strange drop in temperature, the smell of whiskey, the moved coins, and the crash on the stairs. Martin listened quietly and suggested we head over to the house to see if he could figure out what was going on. When we arrived, Martin stopped in his tracks and looked up at the window to my bedroom. I didn't say anything, but I remember seeing the curtains swaying slightly earlier that day. We went inside, and it was unnaturally cold, as though the air itself was heavy with something unspoken. Martin, carrying a Bible and a small purple cloth, began to walk through the house. He asked me to show him where things had happened. I first led him to my daughter's room. He sat on the bed for a while, just observing, before I finally said, "Martin, there's nothing here." The second I said that, he stood up and stared at the corner of the room where my daughter had been staring earlier. The look on his face terrified me. He turned to me and said, "He's a bad soul." We made our way downstairs and sat in the living room. Martin walked around, lightly running his fingers over the walls, before stopping at the kitchen table where the coins were still sitting. He asked if I had set it up, and I said yes. He looked at me and said, "This has angered him. He thinks you're mocking him, and he doesn't appreciate it." I could feel my frustration rising. I told him I was a skeptic, and I didn't want to play any games. I just wanted to know what was going on. Martin asked me to be patient, saying that what I had been experiencing wasn't just my imagination or exhaustion. Then he asked for a pen and paper. I handed him a notepad, and as he began to draw, he said, "This is what the soul is showing me." He drew a series of circles with flower-like shapes inside them. The moment I saw the drawing, a memory flashed in my mind. It looked like the pattern on a ball I had when I was younger. I used to play with it outside, tossing it against the garage wall. Martin told me the spirit didn't like that ball. And suddenly, I remembered something about our old neighbor, Jack Morris. Jack had been an older man, living alone, and he wasn't exactly friendly. He always complained about something. I remember one time, I kicked the ball over the fence into his yard. When we asked for it back, he yelled at us and smelled strongly of whiskey. He never gave it back. Martin explained that Jack had developed a deep resentment toward me and my siblings. He had never had children, and after his wife left him, he became bitter and withdrawn, eventually drinking himself to death. His anger had followed me home and settled into the house. I never returned to the house after it was cleansed. It was too much for me. My aunt and her partner cleared everything out for me, and I moved back to Texas to continue my studies. My mom, who had always been a skeptic, couldn't believe what I'd gone through, but after hearing the details, even she started questioning things. About 3 months ago, while I was getting my 3-year-old son dressed in the living room, I noticed him staring at the doorway with a confused expression. I asked him, "What's wrong?" He replied, "Who was that girl that went past?" I assumed it was probably my little sister, but the floor in our house creaks with every step. I should have heard her, but just to be sure, I got up to check. When I looked around, there was no one there. I shouted up to my sister, asking if she'd been downstairs, and she told me she was in the bathroom, getting ready for school. Without wasting another second, I dashed upstairs and knocked on the bathroom door. When she came out, I quickly explained what had happened, and she was visibly shaken. She insisted I follow her around the house for the rest of the day, just to make sure everything felt normal. Later, I asked my son to describe the girl he saw, but all he could say was that she was taller than his cousin but shorter than his aunt. Around the same time, my son also mentioned seeing another figure, a man. One morning, my mom and sister were in the bathroom, and my son was with them. According to my mom, my son casually turned to my sister and said, "There's a man standing there." A few weeks later, my son woke up in the middle of the night while I was on the phone in the front room. I went to check on him, and he was just staring at me, his face confused. Then he said, "There's a man behind you." My heart stopped. I slowly turned my head, but there was nothing there. I asked my friend, who was on the phone, if they'd heard my son, and they were just as freaked out as I was. I tucked my son back in bed, took one last look around the room, and hurried downstairs. About a week later, my son woke up screaming. I rushed to his room, thinking he had hurt himself. When I got to the doorway, I saw him pointing at thin air, begging me to get something away from him. I froze, unable to see anything, but I followed his pointing, and as soon as I did, he calmed down and fell back asleep. I asked him about the man, but he didn't seem to understand at first. Then he said, "Oh, the man that goes in your room." That's when I decided I wasn't going to ask him any more questions about the ghosts. For a couple of months, things were quiet until the end of November. My sister and son were in the kitchen with our 2 dogs while I was answering the front door. My son rushed out to me, saying something had smashed. When I checked, my sister seemed unnerved, and one of the dogs was sitting between her legs in the cupboard. I asked her what had happened, and she told me a bottle of perfume had shattered on the floor. The strange part was, neither she nor my son had been near the bottle. I went over to inspect it, and the thick glass bottle was completely shattered as if it had been thrown with great force. After that, things seemed to calm down again, except for one odd occurrence a couple of weeks ago when the heating dial was mysteriously turned up without anyone touching it. It only happened that one night, and no one could explain why. What really freaked me out, though, was something that happened years ago when my sister was around the same age as my son now. There was a blackout in the neighborhood, and at the time, my older sister was watching over me, my little sister, and our 2 cousins. After the blackout, my cousin and I went upstairs to play. We hadn't been upstairs long when my older sister came up, looking worried. She asked if we were okay, and when we said yes, she told us that my little sister had been in a panic downstairs, crying that there was a man in the closet and that he was going to get me and my cousin. We all forgot about this until my son started mentioning the man. It's strange how things come full circle, but every time my son mentions it, it brings back memories from my childhood that I'd completely forgotten. I was about 5 years old back in 1998, living in a quiet suburban neighborhood near Sacramento, California. Our house was on a peaceful, tree-lined street, and I didn't have any siblings at the time, so I spent a lot of time alone. My dad worked late, and my mom stayed at home with me. One evening, we were sitting in the living room, just like any other night, watching TV. While we were laughing and talking, I suddenly froze, stopped playing, and ran out of the living room. My mom, startled, followed me and found me standing at the bottom of the stairs, just staring up. I said, "Hello," and smiled. The thing is, there were no other people in the house, and I was alone with my mom. She rushed over and pulled me back into the living room, looking worried. I don't remember much else from that night. A couple of years later, when I was around 7 or 8, things started getting even stranger. My parents had divorced when I was 6, and every weekend I stayed at my dad's house. One night I was in bed when I had a strange dream. It took place in my own room, but something felt off. In the dream, I saw a woman dressed all in black, standing at the foot of my bed. She was holding something, but I couldn't tell what. It wasn't a good or bad feeling, but it made me uneasy. She didn't move, just stared at me. The next morning, I thought it was just a bad dream, but then, a few nights later, I had the exact same dream. This time, my dad tucked me into bed. After he left and closed the door, the woman in black appeared from behind it. She jumped on top of me, throwing something at my ribs. I struggled, but she vanished as quickly as she had appeared. Terrified, I ran out of my room and into my dad's bedroom, where I saw a shadow by his bed. It turned its head towards me. Hey everyone, I put a lot of effort and heart into creating these videos just for you. If you're enjoying the content, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a quick comment below and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Your support means the world to me, and it keeps me motivated to bring more awesome videos your way. When I was younger, my relationship with my paternal grandfather was special, despite the miles that separated us. My parents had always told me that I was named after his older brother, a man he deeply admired who tragically died during World War I. My father once told me how much it meant to my grandfather when he found out I would carry that name. Although we didn't see each other often, he always showed me great affection during the few years we had together. Sadly, we never had the chance to truly bond. My father worked abroad, and my grandparents lived in a small town in Oregon. The cost of travel kept us from visiting frequently, and we would only get to see each other every 2 or 3 years. By the time I turned 10, I hadn't seen my grandfather in 4 years, and my memories of him were already fading. In 1991, things seemed like they were about to change. My father was offered a job in Portland, and our family was finally moving to Oregon. We were all excited, imagining the chance to see my grandparents more often, but as the months passed, I couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out for my grandfather. It wasn't just his health. I had heard stories of his strokes and declining condition, but this feeling ran much deeper, like a strange connection between us. I even dreamt about him a few times. What I didn't know at the time was that my grandfather had also shared similar feelings with my father, saying he didn't believe he'd live long enough to see us at Christmas. 10 days before our move, my grandfather passed away. It was a crushing blow to our family. We had come so close to reuniting with him, only to lose him before we could even say goodbye. That Christmas, we went to Oregon to visit my grandmother. It was a bittersweet trip, one that should have been filled with joy but was instead shadowed by loss. My grandmother graciously gave up her bedroom for my mother and me. It was the same room she had shared with my grandfather for over 20 years. My dad and sister stayed in another room, and on our first night there, everything seemed normal until I was alone in the bedroom, playing with my toys. My mother was getting ready for bed in the bathroom. That's when I heard it, a male voice near the window. "Hello, my name," it said. "Welcome to Oregon." I froze, terrified. I knew I was alone in the room, and I wasn't expecting anyone to be there. I ran out of the room, possibly screaming, though I can't remember clearly, but I was shaken. My parents tried to comfort me, and I eventually returned to the room. My mother came in shortly after, and the rest of the night passed without incident. Despite the shock, I didn't avoid the room afterward. Looking back, I feel guilty about how I reacted. As a 10-year-old, I didn't know what to think about paranormal experiences, and my fear was understandable. But deep down, I believe it was my grandfather trying to reach out to me. He hadn't had the chance to meet his grandchildren before passing, and I think he was lingering in that room, trying to make a connection before moving on. We didn't tell my grandmother about what happened, fearing it would upset her, but later my dad brought it up to her. To my surprise, she didn't dismiss it. She revealed that she, too, had sensed my grandfather's presence around the house after his death. She said it felt like he was around, watching over things until he was ready to move on. Although I had been scared at the time, I'm grateful for the experience now. It's comforting to know my grandfather cared enough to reach out, even from beyond. I hope he's found peace. One day we'll meet again, Grandpa. Until then, rest easy. Underscore 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 underscore. A year ago, I found myself discussing the paranormal with a close friend. We had always been fascinated by supernatural stories, spending nights watching horror movies, browsing through real paranormal videos on YouTube, and reading first-hand accounts. One evening, she suggested we try summoning something ourselves to see if the paranormal was real. She gathered 6 large candles and arranged them in a circle on the floor, convinced that we needed to hold hands and attempt to summon whatever spirit would respond. I hesitated at first, but after her persistent urging, I agreed. We sat quietly for a while, waiting for something to happen, but nothing did. I left feeling disappointed, and as the weeks passed, we both moved on from the experience. Life carried on as usual, and our interest in the supernatural began to fade. But 3 months later, I hit a rough patch in life. I was battling depression and started withdrawing from everyone. My friend, too, was struggling with her own issues, and somehow, this brought us closer, though it wasn't a healthy connection. One night, I was jolted awake by a loud growl. I assumed it was our dog, but when I checked, he was fast asleep in his kennel. I dismissed it as nothing and went back to bed. But a few nights later, I woke up to find a little girl standing at the foot of my bed. She didn't look like the creepy ghosts from horror movies. She wore simple, modern clothes and had long, wavy blonde hair. I stared at her for several minutes before she vanished. Instead of fear, I felt a strange thrill, as if she needed something from me. I felt honored that she had chosen to contact me. It started with her appearing at night, a girl who only I seemed to notice. She was a comforting presence, always just there in the shadows of my room, never saying a word. At first, it felt like a secret just for me, a connection with something beyond the world of the living. But that feeling of excitement quickly turned into fear. One night, I woke up suddenly, only to feel a hot hand pressing over my mouth. Panic gripped me. This wasn't the innocent figure I had thought her to be. I couldn't keep this to myself any longer, so I finally told my parents. My mom, concerned, performed a blessing on my room. For a time, things calmed down. I started feeling like myself again, even starting to crawl out of the dark hole of depression I'd been trapped in. But then, I went to another sleepover, and things took a darker turn. We were watching a movie, The Lion King, when suddenly, a door slammed shut somewhere in the house. We thought it was my friend's older brother messing around, so we called out. No answer. Then from her room came a loud crash. We rushed to check, and that's when we saw it. A picture of the two of us smashed against the wall. It had been hanging perfectly on the opposite side of the room just moments before. We thought her brother was playing a prank, but when we went to confront him, we found he wasn't even home. That night was unlike anything I'd experienced. Our sheets were ripped from the bed, and we heard thumping sounds coming from the wall behind us. My friend, oddly enough, was laughing about it, but I knew the same presence that had haunted me before was back. When I returned home, the atmosphere in my room immediately fell off. The air was thick and cold, a stark contrast to the summer heat outside. I could feel it, something dark, suffocating, standing in the corner by my bed. Over the next few days, the energy in the house grew stronger. I began feeling angry, depressed, lashing out at everyone around me. I isolated myself in my room, and the nights became unbearable. I'd wake to whispers in my ear, but the words were always indecipherable. Desperate, I begged my mom to reach out for help. She called my uncle, who was a pastor, and he agreed to visit. The night before his arrival was the worst. My glasses vanished, and no one in the house admitted to touching them. Later that night, a large shadow moved across my wall, and I felt a heavy weight pin me to the bed. It lasted only a few seconds, but it left me terrified. When my uncle finally came and performed a blessing on the house, it felt like a massive weight had been lifted. The atmosphere in the house lightened, and as we walked through each room to make sure the presence was gone, I found my glasses sitting in the bathtub. The bath had been used since the glasses went missing, so it was clear that something unnatural had been involved. Since that night, I've only experienced small occasional occurrences, but nothing as terrifying as before. I've come to accept these minor events as part of life, and for that, I'm thankful. The worst is finally over. Underscore 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 underscore. New setting: Valhalla, California, USA. Valhalla, a quiet, forgotten town in Northern California, was once a thriving gold mining community. Founded during the 1850s gold rush, it had a population of over 2,000 people at its peak. Today, fewer than 100 people live there, and the town has become a popular destination for those seeking to uncover its haunting history. The few remaining buildings from the old mining days still stand, and visitors can explore the deep mines where gold was once extracted. One of Walhalla's eerie landmarks is the old cemetery, perched on a steep hill that offers a breathtaking view of the valley below. It's said that the town's residents were buried standing up to prevent their bodies from sliding down the slope and into the town below. I first visited Walhalla when I was 15, tagging along with my parents and family friends. Being a fan of old cemeteries, I was drawn to the town's history. On that cold winter day, the place felt abandoned, almost as though it was waiting for someone to uncover its secrets. My family set up a picnic near the cemetery, but I couldn't resist the urge to explore. As I wandered among the tombstones, the silence was unsettling. That's when I felt it, a tug on the hood of my jacket. I spun around, heart racing, but saw nothing. My family was still below, and there were no other visitors around. I shook off the unease and went back to the picnic table. "Did a ghost follow you?" My dad joked, noticing my discomfort. After lunch, we set off to hike to the old cricket field, which lay at the top of a steep hill. My dad and I climbed the slope together, while the others stayed behind. From the top, the view was stunning. We stood there, taking it all in, when suddenly we heard it. A sharp thwack, like the sound of a bat hitting a ball, followed by running feet. We both froze, glancing at each other in disbelief. The field was empty except for us. "Did you hear that?" I asked. My dad nodded, uneasy. We should go. Even though the sounds faded quickly, they had been clear, as if a game was being played by invisible players. Later, we toured the old mine. While nothing strange happened to me, my dad mentioned feeling something, like someone was pinching the back of his legs. At one point, he even turned to scold me, only to realize I was standing next to him. He was alone when he thought I was behind him. My dad, a firm skeptic, left Walhalla that day scratching his head, unsure of what to make of what had happened. Years later, I returned to Walhalla with two friends, Lisa and Shane, both of whom shared my interest in the paranormal. They were excited to see the cemetery, both by day and by night. While I was okay with a daytime visit, I wasn't thrilled about exploring it in the dark. During the day, we wandered through the old graveyard, admiring the ancient tombstones. I pulled out my camera to snap a few pictures, but as soon as I turned it on, the battery died. I checked it again, fresh batteries just moments before, but it was completely drained. Frustrated, I tried to brush it off as bad luck, but just 15 minutes later, Lisa's camera, with fresh batteries, also died. Only Shane's camera kept working. That evening after dinner, we decided to return to the cemetery. I was already on edge, and my unease grew when my flashlight started to flicker and eventually died out completely. I stayed close to Lisa and Shane, who still had their torches working, and we cautiously made our way to the cemetery's edge. The graveyard looked unnaturally dark, as if a thick, oppressive fog had swallowed it whole. Even the beams from our flashlights seemed to vanish into the suffocating darkness. As Shane started taking pictures, a sudden, overwhelming presence washed over me. I clung to Lisa, who whispered that she felt the same chill creeping up her spine. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it. A dark figure of a man, walking along the white fence that bordered the graveyard. He wore a wide-brimmed hat, and I could see his arms swinging with each step. "Please, tell me I'm not the only one seeing this," I blurted out, my heart racing. Both Lisa and Shane turned, and after a few expletives, they confirmed they saw it too. The figure wasn't solid. It seemed more like a shadow, its height shifting as it moved closer. Overcome by fear, we ran back to the car, abandoning all pretense of bravery. On the drive home, we reviewed Shane's photos, but while some looked eerie, none captured anything definitive. We laugh about it now, but in the moment, we were genuinely terrified. I'm convinced the figure was a ghostly presence, warning us to stay away, and honestly, I don't blame him for wanting us off his turf. My first real encounter with the paranormal that I can remember happened when I was 14, living in a hotel in a small town in Oregon. My mom was the manager, so we stayed in the manager's room. One day, as I was walking down the hallway toward our room, I caught a glimpse of something in the reflection of a glass door leading outside. It was an old man. He had graying hair, dressed in a suit, with a half-bald head and a face that wasn't exactly sad or happy, just serene. Thinking he was lost, I turned around to offer help, but there was no one there. Curious, I walked to the corner of the hallway to see if he had turned, but still, no one. I hadn't heard any doors closing or footsteps fading away. A chill ran down my spine, and I sprinted back to our room, terrified. I didn't tell my mom for weeks, because it just didn't make sense. When I finally did, she listened quietly. Then she revealed that she had seen the same man but hadn't told me because she didn't want to scare me. She also shared another experience. A woman who had been attending a conference at the hotel had gone searching for her and had seen the same man, standing by a fire hose. When the woman tried to speak to him, he didn't respond. He just stood up and walked right through the wall. Months passed without any other sightings, but one day, while cleaning out a storage room, we found an old photo album. Among the pictures, there was a photo of the man. We discovered his name was Michael Goldman, the original owner of the hotel, who had passed away decades ago. We lived in that hotel for a few years before moving to a house in a small town. In our new home, I began feeling an eerie sense of being watched, especially in my bedroom and the unused front living room. The feeling was unsettling, but it never escalated until one particular night. A friend invited me over, and a group of us, Kyle, Brett, Dylan, Alex, and I, decided to make a homemade Ouija board using paper letters and 4 candles. Looking back, I realize how reckless it was, but at the time, my curiosity got the best of me. The first few tries yielded nothing. Then on the 4th try, the glass we were using as a planchette started moving. One of the candles in the corner began flickering wildly, and the room turned icy cold. We were both intrigued and scared. Eventually, we made contact with what felt like a very dark presence. The entity turned hostile, swearing at us and encouraging us to harm ourselves. We tried to remain calm and polite, but it only mocked us, laughing and swearing louder. Terrified, we decided to end the session. One by one, we asked for permission to leave, and the entity said goodbye to everyone except me. It wouldn't let me go. The glass darted across the table, refusing to stop. My friends watched in horror as I sat there, frozen in fear. I begged the entity to let me go, apologizing for ever messing with the board. Finally, it said goodbye, and I promised I would never touch a Ouija board again. A week or two later, something happened that I will never forget. Late one night after getting home from work, I went to use the bathroom. The door was open, though I'm not sure why. Suddenly, I felt an overwhelming sense of dread. I turned around, and in that instant, a black figure with glowing red eyes lunged at me, sprinting straight through me. The force knocked me to one knee, leaving me cold and drained. Since that night, I haven't had many direct paranormal experiences, but the feeling of being watched has never truly left me. It strikes most when I'm trying to sleep. There's always a presence in the room, keeping me awake with a sense of dread until around 3 a.m., when it finally seems to let me rest. My name is Courtney, and I'm 15 years old. I've always believed in ghosts and the supernatural, but I didn't experience anything paranormal until last Christmas when my family and I visited my aunt's house in a small town in Maine. We had just returned from an incredible trip to New Orleans, one of the most fascinating places I've ever been. Over the years, I'd heard plenty of unsettling stories about my aunt's house, and they only served to deepen my curiosity. The house itself had quite the eerie history. It was built from the remnants of an old church that once stood on the property, giving it an unsettling charm. The house is a large, 2-story structure perched atop a steep hill in a quiet town called Silver Springs, a place known for its deep history and strange happenings. My aunt, uncle, and cousin lived there, and until recently, they had a family cat named Emily. Emily wore a collar with a bell, which made her easy to hear as she wandered through the house. Tragically, just a week before our visit, Emily had been hit by a car on the quiet, winding road outside and was buried in the front yard. It was the morning of October 9th, 2011. around 4:30 a.m. when I was suddenly awoken. It was cold, but that wasn't unusual for a fall morning in Silver Springs. What was unusual, however, was the intense feeling in the pit of my stomach. Something didn't feel right. I tried to dismiss the unease and go back to sleep, but it clung to me like a shadow. After a few moments, I heard a faint noise in the distance. Straining to listen, I realized it was the sound of a bell, Emily's bell. At first, I thought my mind was playing tricks on me, but the sound was so clear it sent a chill through my body. Then abruptly, the bell stopped, offering a brief moment of relief, until I heard something else. Footsteps. Light, echoing footsteps creeping up the stairs. My heart raced in my chest. I froze, staring at the door in line with the staircase, wondering if someone, or something, was about to enter. The footsteps paused at the top of the stairs, and for a moment, there was complete silence. Then they started again, this time heavier, like an adult was walking down the hall toward my mom, who was asleep on the couch at the far end of the hallway. My mind spun with dread, imagining what could be coming next. The footsteps stopped once again, right where my mom was resting. I lay there, motionless, waiting for something to happen, but the house was eerily silent. The cold had disappeared, leaving a strange, unsettling calm in its wake. With what little courage I had left, I turned on every light upstairs and checked each room. Everyone was sound asleep. Confused and terrified, I rushed to wake my mom and explained everything that had happened. She listened, but half asleep, she soon drifted off again, leaving me alone with my fear. Eventually, I fell back asleep too, but only when the first light of dawn crept into the room, making the house feel a bit safer. The next morning, I went downstairs, still shaken. I overheard my mom telling my aunt about my experience, confirming it wasn't just a nightmare. I became the topic of conversation, and my aunt casually mentioned that things like this had happened before. She explained that the bell I'd heard was Emily. The light footsteps belonged to a young boy, and the heavier footsteps were those of a 20-year-old man. She also shared that these occurrences weren't just confined to the night. Sometimes they happened in broad daylight. She mentioned that light bulbs in the house would shatter for no apparent reason. The way she spoke about it so matter-of-factly unnerved me, as though these things were just part of daily life there. My mom also mentioned that the night before, she had been watching a documentary about the haunting of an old mansion in California we had visited during a past trip. I couldn't help but feel that the timing of it all was unnervingly coincidental. Now I find myself with a question. While I'm still processing the terrifying experience, my mom is already planning another visit to my aunt's house. I'm genuinely scared to go back. What should I do? And what does it mean that I was the only one awake when all of this happened? The sensation crept up my legs, unmistakable and deliberate. Slowly, it moved toward my knees, the weight growing real with each passing second. I didn't dare look, but the presence was undeniable, a palpable pressure as if something, or someone, was inching closer. Then, without warning, another weight brushed against my hand. Another presence near my feet. The overwhelming sensation of multiple beings. There were more than one. I felt a soft, familiar touch on my neck. A cat. Its fur brushed against me, its paws stretching as it walked along my skin, sending a shiver down my spine. Though my heart pounded in fear, an odd calmness settled over me. These were no ordinary cats. They were ghostly beings, but somehow I felt protected. I whispered, "You can leave now. I feel safe." The moment the words left my lips, the cats disappeared. Shaken, I couldn't stop thinking about that night and the days that followed. Was it the spirit of the old homeowner, angry at us for tearing down his house? Or was it something darker, perhaps from the nearby cemetery? The 3 cats had come to protect me, and that thought lingered. I shared the experience with my family and friends. They agreed it seemed like I had guardian spirits in the form of cats. I even wondered if they were the spirits of my childhood pets, particularly a white, furry one that had always loved curling up next to me. Since that night, nothing paranormal happened in the house again. It was as though the cats had taken care of whatever was lurking there. In August 2003, my family and I went on holiday to Albany, Australia. We stayed in a hotel on the edge of town, surrounded by dense trees and the occasional eerie fog. One evening, as we sat up late discussing spiritual experiences, I met a man who claimed to have unique abilities. He told me that in his hometown in Sri Lanka, he was well known for communicating with the dead, healing people, and driving away evil spirits. Intrigued, I asked him how he did it. He explained that angels whispered to him, guiding him with healing powers and revealing truths that others couldn't know. But when I pressed for more details, he grew hesitant, warning me that if he said too much, it might anger the angels. He also told me not to share what he had told me. Curious, I asked if he could heal me or check for any negative energy around me. After some hesitation, he agreed. We sat in the dim light of the hotel room as he slowly waved his hands around me, chanting in a language I didn't recognize. When he finished, he told me to look in the mirror. I didn't have the courage to do it. That night, I experienced an intense dream, one I hadn't had since childhood. I was clinging to a narrow cliff, with waves crashing below, threatening to pull me off. In the dream, I never let go, just like when I was a child. But that night didn't end there. I woke up drenched in sweat, feeling unbearably hot. I had the distinct sensation that I was being watched, staring at me from the shadows. Panicked, I woke him up and asked him to turn on the air conditioning and the lights. He was calm, almost amused, and smiled at me. I told you, he said, if we fool around with this stuff, you'll start feeling the angels around me. He assured me I wasn't in danger, just not used to their presence. But if they were angels, why did I feel so scared? When I told him about my dream, he said it was a fire spirit testing me. The burning sensation I had felt in the dream was because it had briefly touched me while I slept. After that night, I woke up every morning at 3 a.m., feeling as though someone was watching me. After our holiday, he came over to my house, and I introduced him to my best friend. He offered to do a reading for her, but the session ended awkwardly after he made a strange noise that set us both off into laughter. We couldn't stop, and he never finished the reading. Shortly after, we lost touch with him. Things only worsened for me. Though I had always felt safe in my modern home, only a few years old, I started waking up at 3 a.m. every night, overwhelmed by the feeling of being watched. I couldn't stand to sleep in my room anymore, and ended up on the couch in the living room for 3 months. Friends who visited confirmed what I feared. One friend admitted she felt uneasy walking past my bedroom. Another mentioned she felt a strange, unsettling energy in the room. Desperate for answers, I reached out to him. He told me that it was just my angels watching over me, and that being around him had heightened my sensitivity to the spiritual world. But if they were angels, why did I feel such fear? I wondered if the chanting had something to do with it, or maybe it was the fact that my friend and I laughed during his reading. It took months before I felt safe enough to sleep in my own room again. Now, I can't shake my obsession with the number 3 a.m. and what it might mean. Some say it's the holy hour when guardian angels are most active. Others claim it's when evil spirits are strongest. Someone even suggested I might have been visited by a jinn, which could explain the terrifying dreams and burning sensations. I still don't know the truth. My house, built in the 1920s, holds many secrets. But whatever was going on, I'm still left wondering what truly was watching me. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more.